December 5th, 1945. Fort Lauderdale Naval Air Station smelled of salt, oil, and dusted leather that morning. The war was officially over, yet its shadow lingered on every surface. The Pacific had fallen silent only weeks earlier, and the Navy, in transition, was trying to turn war fighters into instructors, to fold combat experience into training flights for new cadets. The tempo of duty remained brisk, though the edge of desperation had dulled. There were medals pinned, farewells spoken, and pilots who had survived the oceans of fire now found themselves leading drills over calm blue waters. Inside the cramped briefing room, 30 chairs faced a wide map board pinned with grease pencil lines. A projector hummed faintly, illuminating charts of the Atlantic off the Florida coast. The plan was routine, a triangular course stretching from Fort Lauderdale eastward, then north, then back southwest, a navigation exercise that cadets could fly in their sleep. Yet everyone knew that no flight over the open Atlantic was ever entirely routine. The ceiling fans ticked lazily overhead, doing little to cut the humidity that pressed down like wet cloth. Cigarette smoke curled above rows of khaki uniforms. Men shifted in their seats, flight logs balanced on their knees, as the instructor at the front tapped the chalk against the board. Flight 19, he announced, his voice sharp. 5 Avengers, TBM torpedo bombers. You've flown them. You know their quirks. Navigation will be your test today, not gunnery. Weather is clear. Wind steady. Fuel loads accounted for. The pilots nodded, though one, Captain Charles C. Taylor, the designated flight leader, sat slightly apart. He was older than the rest, 28, his face lined from the Pacific campaign. Rumors said he'd been shot down more than once, had ditched in rough seas, and lived to tell about it. His eyes, a pale blue, fixed on the map but seemed to drift beyond it, as if he were looking not at coordinates but at ghosts. Next to him, Lieutenant Robert Bobby Carroll scribbled notes furiously, though his gaze kept flicking to Taylor, searching for some unspoken assurance. Carroll had not seen combat. He had been too late for Pacific, too early for Korea. The war for him had been classrooms, simulators, and the echoes of victories he hadn't tasted. Now he sought fragments of belonging in every gesture of his senior officers. A dozen chairs back, Ensign Daniel Harland shifted uncomfortably. He was the one who carried a small leather notebook tucked in his jacket pocket, a habit he had picked up as a child, sketching clouds and machines. He would later become the voice through which fragments of this day survived. At the moment, though, he was merely an observing cadet, more prone to noticing the drip of condensation on the window pane than the precise fuel figures the instructor rattled off. The instructor stick trace lines. Leg 1, 75 miles east. Leg 2, turn north, another 75. Leg 3, southwest back to base. You'll keep radio contact throughout. Standard formation. Flight leader. Call signs to be used. Time hack at 1,400 hours. Someone coughed. Pen scratched. The projector clicked to another chart. Isobars and wave reports. Visibility should be excellent, the instructor continued. No storms in the area. Expect calm seas. Still, he paused, looking over the rows of young men. Keep sharp. These waters can play tricks. That remark drew nervous laughter. Everyone knew the stories whispered around base bars. Compasses spinning wild. Lights seen over the horizon. Ships gone without trace. Sailors told them with a shrug, half believing, half dismissing. But pilots, especially those who flew the long stretches of open blue, knew how silence could press against the canopy, how clouds could knit into walls, how bearings could slip a fraction of a degree and stretch into eternity. Taylor cleared his throat. His voice was measured but carried an edge. If instruments fail, we fly by sun and sea. If radios fail, we maintain heading. If one bird falters, the formation carries on. Do not scatter. Do not drift. His words were not a warning so much as a command. Yet Harland, notebook still closed, felt the hair rise at the back of his neck. There was a gravity in Taylor's tone that spoke not only of discipline but of experience, of things he would not share with cadets, but carried in the tightness of his jaw. The briefing wound down. Men rose, chairs scraped, boots echoed on the wooden floor. The projector snapped off with a hollow clunk. Papers were gathered, Cigarettes stubbed out. Conversations broke into clusters. Some joking, some quietly repeating headings and bearings. Outside, the late morning sun glared off aluminum fuselages parked on the tarmac, their propellers glinting like blades. Harland lingered. He watched Taylor fold his map with deliberate care, slide it into his jacket pocket, and pause at the doorway as if listening for something in the silence beyond. For the briefest moment, Taylor's eyes met Harland's. The look was not reassuring. It was searching. Later, decades later, Harland's notebooks, rescued from an attic box, would contain a line scribbled on the back page from this morning. He looks like a man who has already flown this course before, or like a man who knows we won't return. The call came over the loudspeaker. Flight 19, report to aircraft. Engines coughed to life across the field, radial pistons rumbling into a chorus of metal and fire. Ground crew moved briskly, signaling with batons. The squadron walked toward their Avengers, helmets tucked under arms, parachutes clipped, flight jackets tied against the ocean wind. Taylor climbed into his cockpit, his motions precise, ritualistic. Carroll followed, joking nervously with his mechanic. Harland paused to run his hand across the fuselage skin, warm in the sun, cold in his imagination. Propellers blurred. Dust rose. The air vibrated with the sound of machines eager to take the sky. At 1,410 hours, Flight 19 rolled down the runway, one after another, lifting into the December light. Their shadows skimmed the field, then vanished over the coast, out toward the wide, waiting Atlantic. On the ground, the map board still glowed faintly from the projector bulb, greased pencil lines forming a neat triangle. On paper, it was geometry. In the sky, it would soon become something else. The December sun leaned westward when the first of the Avengers rolled down the runway, its propeller a blur, its shadow racing ahead on the concrete. Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale, usually noisy with ground drills, seemed to hush as the 5 planes lumbered into motion. Engines roared with piston thunder, shaking windows and rib cages alike, each machine a 40-foot promise of power and vulnerability. From the tower, controllers marked time, 1,410 hours. Routine log entries. No anomalies. Not yet. The Avengers rose one by one, their wings flexing under the strain of lift. Each carried a crew of 3, pilot, radio man, gunner, though not every seat was filled. Today was navigation, not combat. The empty stations echoed slightly, amplifying a feeling of space and solitude. Captain Charles Taylor, flight leader, banked gently after takeoff, his bombers circling to form the lead. His voice cut across the radio with crisp authority. All ships, this is Foxterra 28. Form on me. Heading 070. The call crackled with static, but was clear enough, for acknowledgments followed, the cadets repeating the heading like incantations. From the ground, civilians looked up as the formation passed over the coastline. Locals in beach shacks pointed. Children waved. Fishermen in small boats squinted at the sudden growl overhead. To them, the Navy was a daily rhythm of metal shadows against the Florida sky. They could not know these would be the last moments anyone on shore would see Flight 19 intact. Inside Taylor's cockpit, gauges shimmered in the glare of late afternoon light. The compass needle jittered with the vibration of the engine, steady enough to trust. He adjusted throttle, the hum of the propeller settling into a hypnotic cadence. His logbook sat open on his knee, greased pencil poised for coordinates. Behind him, Ensign Daniel Harland clicked on his personal recorder, a small, unauthorized device he carried against regulations. The reel-to-reel word faintly under the engine noise. His whispered words, half audible on the tape decades later, would read, "Takeoff clean, sky sharp, sea endless, leader steady, feeling like routine, but there's a weight, like the air itself doesn't want us here." The 5 Avengers aligned eastward, climbing to altitude. Their dark fuselages gleamed against the water, sunlight striking wings like mirrors. The Atlantic opened wide beneath them, a sheet of blue so perfect it seemed painted. For the cadets in the trailing planes, adrenaline surged. This was what they had trained for, the roar, the formation, the endless horizon waiting to be measured and mastered. One cadet, pressed against his canopy glass, shouted to his gunnerless rear seat as if the empty chair could hear, "Christ, it's beautiful up here." The radio popped with static. Carroll, the eager lieutenant, adjusted his headset, tapping the side. He spoke. "Foxterre 2-8. This is 2-9. Getting some background noise. Repeat, are you reading me?" Taylor's reply was clipped. 2-9, you're clear. Stay on course. Yet Harland's compass needle quivered. Just a hair. East was east, but the dial swayed a degree too far. Then snapped back. He frowned, tapping the glass, then noted it quietly in his leather book. Needle unstable. Possible vibration. The sun angled lower, gilding the ocean in metallic light. The 5 planes cast long shadows that darted across the swells, then vanished as the sea darkened beneath them. From the tower, the flight was logged. 1,415 hours. Flight 19 en route. Course, east 75 miles. Weather, clear. Visibility excellent. Everything appeared routine. But in the cockpits, the atmosphere held subtle dissonance. Radios crackled with tiny bursts of static that no adjustment erased. The air seemed unusually still, yet instruments suggested gusts at their altitude. Taylor squinted at the horizon, watching thin cirrus clouds that looked less like vapor and more like chalk lines dragged across blue glass. "Formation steady," he called. "Maintain." One by one, the cadets repeated, "Maintain." At 1,420 hours, a fishing vessel 30 miles offshore noted the formation overhead. Its captain, later interviewed, described the planes as lined up neat like ducks, but added a curious detail. He thought the sound bent, as if the roar had come from 2 directions at once. His crew laughed at the phrasing and thought no more of it. Carroll scribbled notes on his knee pad. Sky clear. No wind. His handwriting jittered with the vibrations, the pencil lead breaking once, leaving a smear. Harland's recorder word. He whispered again. "Radio carrying, but it sounds hollow, like voices in a tunnel." Minutes passed. The first leg stretched ahead, the ocean unrolling without seam. The cadets settled into rhythm, calling headings, checking gauges, listening for Taylor's corrections. Some chewed gum, others hummed nervously into their mics. But in Taylor's cockpit, something gnawed. He glanced repeatedly at his compass, then at the sun's position, then back. His jaw tightened. The memory of past flights, missions lost in squalls, instruments that betrayed, pressed at the edge of his thoughts. He keyed the mic. "All ships, this is 2-8. Confirm heading 070. Repeat it back." Each voice came one by one. 070, 070, 070, 070. The responses steadied him, but the compass needle quivered again, pausing just off true. He swallowed hard. Far below, the Atlantic darkened to a deeper hue. A shimmer, like heat haze, rippled across the water's surface, unnoticed by most eyes but caught by Harland's. He blinked, thought an illusion, then jotted in his notebook, "Glare unusual, like glass flexing." At 1,430 hours, the formation leveled at assigned altitude. The engines droned steady, the radios carried clipped chatter, and the sky remained deceptively clear. To any observer, Flight 19 was nothing more than 5 bombers on a triangle course. Yet within the cockpits, unease coiled. Each man felt it differently. A compass that wavered, a radio that hollowed, a shimmer on the horizon. None of it enough to call abnormal. None of it enough to abort. Harland's final whisper on that first reel, captured faintly through static, would later become one of the most haunting fragments recovered. "Up here, everything looks ordinary, but I swear it isn't. It feels like something is watching us. Waiting." The Avengers pressed on, 5 black silhouettes against a darkening sky, climbing into the first edge of a storm no weather map had predicted. By the time Flight 19 leveled into its eastward leg, the Florida coastline had already dissolved behind them. The pale smear of land receded into haze, then into memory, leaving nothing but the Atlantic below and the afternoon sky above. The ocean stretched in every direction like a sheet of hammered steel, sunlight flickering across ridges of swell, each wave indistinguishable from the next. Inside the cockpits, the atmosphere was routine, at least on the surface. Each pilot checked fuel gauges, scribbled bearings, adjusted throttles. The air smelled of oil and salt, the vibration of engines carrying the bones of the men strapped inside. They were machines wrapped in machines, men woven into fabric of steel and rivets, bound by heading and discipline. Flight. Confirm altitude 1,200. Taylor's voice came over the net, measured, precise. 29 confirms. 31 confirms. 33 confirms. 35 confirms. The acknowledgement snapped back like soldiers saluting. Yet beneath the cadence of procedure, subtle intrusions began. Carroll, in 29, adjusted his headset again, frowning at a low, persistent hum riding under the radio chatter. At first he thought it was static. Then, for an instant, it rose in pitch, almost musical, like a wire drawn taut. He shook his head, made a note on his pad. Unusual tone, check headset later. In the third plane, Harland's compass wavered again. The needle jerked a full 3 degrees east, then stilled. He tapped the glass, convinced it was vibration, but he also switched on his small personal recorder, the reels humming softly at his elbow. His whisper, captured faintly over the engine roar, would later send chills into anyone who heard it. Compass slipping. Only for a second, but real. I don't like it. The ocean below was deceptively calm. Its vastness blurred depth perception. Without a coastline to anchor the eye, the pilots found themselves flying through an endless mirror. Even the sun, now lowering in the sky, seemed to scatter oddly, its reflection glancing from multiple points on the sea rather than one. Taylor glanced down at his map board, the greased pencil lines bright against the paper. His experience told him the course was correct, the time checked steady. Yet his instincts nagged. He looked outside at the horizon, sharp, unbroken, and felt a tension he could not name. At 1,445 hours, the first real exchange of unease surfaced. Carroll, leader, 2-9. I've got interference. Sounds like another channel bleeding. Taylor, negative. All flights hold frequency. Say again, 2-9. Carroll, it's like someone talking. Not clear. Not us. Static flared, then snapped quiet. From his rear seat, Harland leaned forward, craning to listen. He swore he heard something. Faint syllables under the hiss. Not English. Not code. Something curved and clipped, like syllables caught in machinery. He pressed the record button harder, as if force would trap the sound. The others dismissed it with shrugs. Interference happened. The airwaves were full of naval traffic, merchant signals, civilian bands. Yet the tone lingered, a flavor that none could shake. Minutes ticked. The formation droned eastward, propellers cutting air into symmetrical thunder. Harland scribbled in his notebook between coordinates. There are voices under the static, not ours, like a choir very far away. At 14:55, Taylor ordered a position check. Each pilot reported time, fuel, and heading. All figures matched. No errors. The routine reasserted itself. But then Carroll laughed suddenly into the net, not with humor but disbelief. Leader, 2-9. My clock, it jumped. Lost a minute. Taylor, say again. Carroll, 1 minute gone. Just skipped. My watch read 49, now 50. I didn't see it move. Taylor frowned. He pulled his own stopwatch from his vest, confirmed against the panel clock. Both ticked normally. He chalked Carroll's outbursts and nerves, yet his gut clenched. He marked the time anyway. The sea below shifted hue. It had been blue. Now it was darker, almost violet. Sunlight scattered strangely, as though the water's surface were refracting instead of reflecting. Harland stared, pen poised, and wrote, "The sea looks wrong. Like glass-bending light." At 1,500 hours, the log at Fort Lauderdale recorded Flight 19 proceeding normally. The men in the tower heard none of the static, saw none of the compass needles twitch, felt none of the tightening coils in each cockpit. From land, 5 Avengers were just blips on a board, dots moving as expected. Inside the air, however, the first layers of dissonance had spread. Harland whispered again into his recorder, his words a thread through engine thunder. Everything is steady, but it doesn't feel steady. I think the sky is lying to us. The words trembled, captured forever on fragile tape. Taylor kept his eyes forward, jaw locked, hands steady on the yoke. His duty was to lead. His burden was to ignore the ghosts until they proved themselves real. The Atlantic yawned wider, horizon unbroken, silence heavy. The open sea had them now. 5 dark shapes stitched across a canvas of water and sky, and the first seams of reality had already begun to fray. The ocean had a way of erasing time. A pilot could stare down at the swells and swear he was frozen in place, the water rolling endlessly but never seeming to change. By 1510 hours, Flight 19 had been airborne for a full hour, yet the horizon remained stubbornly identical, blue above, blue below, and nothing else. Taylor's voice broke the monotony. "Flight, prepare to turn north at 75 miles. On my mark." Acknowledgments came back in crisp chorus, but as Taylor scanned his gauges, his brow furrowed. The odometer's mileage did not line up with the elapsed time. By fuel burn, they should have reached the checkpoint already. By clock, they were 5 minutes behind. Yet the horizon revealed no shoals, no specks of land, not even the faint shadow of the Bahama Cays they expected. He pressed the mic. 2-9, what's your mileage? Carroll, 75, sir. Taylor, and your clock? Carroll, 15:05. Taylor, check again. Carroll, 15:02, sir. The 3-minute discrepancy settled over the air like frost. Harland in the third plane scribbled it down quickly, pencil scratching. Time drift between cockpits. Not just nerves. Real. His compass needle shivered again, this time swinging 4 degrees east before correcting. He reached for the recorder, whispering with urgency. "We're losing alignment. Instruments disagree. It feels like the sky itself is sliding." The voice on tape quavered, as though he were struggling to believe his own words. By now, the radios had acquired another distortion. When Taylor issued commands, the echoes came back delayed, not only from the cadets, but as faint repetitions of his own voice. Once, after he barked, "Maintain course," a thinner, almost metallic version of his order repeated itself half a second later, as if a ghost channel were bleeding through. Carroll heard it too. His nervous laugh came over the net. "Leader, say again? I thought you doubled that." Taylor, "Negative. Repeat only when ordered." Silence, then static. The formation held. 5 bombers aligned eastward, yet a subtle loosening had begun. Harland noticed first. The plane to his starboard dipped slightly low, then corrected late, as if the controls had a fraction of delay. Across the formation, Carroll's Avenger swayed left, its wingtip shimmering oddly in the sunlight. Taylor saw it too. His jaw clenched. Flight, tighten up, close formation. No drift. Engines growled as throttles adjusted. Planes inching back to precision. For a few moments the triangle steadied again. 5 shadows etched across the sky. But Harland's stomach churned. He felt it physically now. A pull in his gut as though gravity itself were listing. His hands trembled against the yoke. He muttered into his recorder, voice almost pleading. "It's not turbulence. It's like the air leans. You can feel it. You can feel the drift." The reel spun on, capturing engine thunder, static hiss, and the faint double voices that haunted the frequency. Taylor forced a decision. He looked at his map, checked the sun's angle, and told himself the course was still sound. He keyed the mic, voice clip commanding. "Flight, turn north. Leg 2. Now!" One by one, the Avengers banked, noses tilting, wings dipping into the vastness. The ocean tilted with them, the sky slipping sideways. For an instant the sun seemed to flicker, not dimming but doubling, as though 2 orbs overlapped in the haze. Carroll cursed softly into his mic. "Christ, I saw it." Sun split for a second. No one answered. Taylor gritted his teeth. He could not afford superstition. His duty was control. Yet as the bombers rolled onto their new heading, he could not ignore the sensation that their turn had been assisted, as though invisible fingers had nudged their wings into line. The second leg stretched ahead, northward into the late afternoon. Shadows lengthened across the cockpits. Fuel gauges ticked down imperceptibly. Still, the dissonance remained. Watches across the flight no longer agreed. 2 minutes here, for there. Compass needles jittered and reset. The radios hissed with phantom syllables that no one acknowledged out loud. Harland pressed his pencil against paper, the words jagged with a tremor in his hand. It feels like we are flying inside something, not over it, like a current pulling sideways. He clicked the recorder again, whispering. Leader gave the turn, but I swear something else turned us. We're not alone in the controls. The tape caught the desperation in his breath, the sense that the machinery around him had slipped out of human dominion. Taylor refused to yield to fear. His voice came steady, though his eyes darted from compass to sun to horizon and back again. Formation intact. Stay sharp. Stay with me. But already, in ways small and subtle, Flight 19 was no longer wholly in his hands. The drift had begun. By 15:30 hours, Flight 19 had been northbound for nearly 20 minutes. According to every chart, according to every navigation lesson drilled into them, they should have seen the first glimmer of islands by now, small smudges of land interrupting the expanse of blue. But the horizon remained empty. Empty and yet not. Taylor adjusted his goggles against the glare. The line where ocean met sky no longer seemed sharp. Instead, it pulsed faintly, like the edge of an old television screen catching static. At first he thought it was haze, or the trick of late afternoon sun. But when he blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked again, the shimmer remained. Flight, maintain heading, he ordered. His voice was steady, almost clipped. Eyes forward. Carroll responded, but his tone betrayed unease. 2-9 copies. Leader, the horizon looks strange. Do you see it? Taylor didn't answer, acknowledging it would give it power. In the third plane, Harland leaned closer to his canopy, heart racing. He scribbled in his notebook, letters slanted, hurried. Horizon is breaking, like glass with cracks. Then he clicked his recorder on, the reels whirring faintly. His whisper was ragged. It's there. I see it. The horizon's not a line anymore. It's a seam tearing. The tape caught the edge of terror in his voice. The radios added to the dissonance. At 1,534 hours, Taylor called another course check, for acknowledgments followed, but each one arrived staggered, as though someone had pressed repeat with a delay. Even stranger, after the last cadet confirmed, a fifth voice repeated the order again, a faint, tinny mimic of Taylor himself, half a beat late. The men fell silent. No one dared to mention it aloud, but every headset carried the echo. Static built behind the voices, a soft crackling that grew into sharp pops like distant lightning. The sky above remained blue, cloudless, yet the air seemed alive with electrical tension. Needles twitched on radios, dials quivered. Carroll muttered an oath. His radio man, seated behind, leaned forward and shouted over the engine, "Sir, I smell ozone." Harland smelled it too, faint but metallic, as though a storm brewed inside the cockpit itself. At 15:40, Taylor ordered another heading correction. He noted the sun, checked his map, but unease gnawed at him. By his reckoning, the sun should be settling to their right, west, descending at a shallow angle. Yet when he looked, it seemed too high, its position subtly wrong. He checked his watch. The hands read 15:41. The panel clock, however, read 15:38. He swallowed hard, logged the discrepancy, and forced his voice to stay even. Flight, hold formation, no deviation. The cadets echoed back, but their voices cracked. Harland wrote in his notebook, sun not where it should be, time split, horizon fractured. He flipped on the recorder again. The sun's wrong. Either the clocks are lying or the sky is. I don't know which. The engine drone filled the background, punctuated by bursts of static that sounded less and less like noise and more like syllables. 15 minutes later, the horizon buckled. It wasn't dramatic, no fiery rift, no explosion. It was subtle, like heat haze magnified. The line separating water and sky shimmered, bent, then rippled as though someone had dragged a finger through it. For an instant, The ocean appeared higher than the horizon itself, as though gravity had slipped. Carol's shout cut through the net. "Leader," I lost a line. "The seas, Jesus, it's moving." Taylor barked back instantly. "Hold heading. Stay with me. Do not scatter." But in each cockpit, the pilots gripped their controls tighter, fighting the urge to bank away from the illusion. The shimmer intensified. What had been a line became a band became a curtain. Thin veins of light ran across it, pale blue-white threads flickering like lightning frozen mid-strike. They did not move randomly. They traced patterns, arcs, and lattices, forming shapes that no one wanted to recognize. Harland stared until his eyes watered. He whispered, nearly sobbing into the recorder. "Geometry on the horizon. Not clouds. Not storm. Lines. It's drawing something." The static on the radios rose, syncing with the flickers. Each burst timed to a pulse across the horizon curtain. At 1,548 hours, the first instrument failed. Carol reported it, voice high. "Leader, my compass just spun." Taylor checked his own, still steady, though trembling. He pressed the mic. "All ships, cross-check. Confirm your bearings." The replies came back scattered, inconsistent. 060, 045, 090. They should have all been aligned, yet their compasses disagreed wildly. Taylor clenched his teeth. He knew compasses could fail over the Bahamas, but not like this, not all at once. He issued his last calm order of the hour. Maintain visual. Instruments unreliable. Fly the sun. But even as he said it, he knew the sun could not be trusted. Its position was wrong, its light warped by the curtain now stretching across the horizon. Harland jotted one last frantic note. "We are inside a lie. The world is folding." The recorder caught his final whisper of the leg. "If anyone finds this tape, know it started with the horizon. The line broke. The line is gone." Ahead, the curtain pulsed brighter, veins of impossible geometry threading through the sky, and Flight 19 flew straight toward it. By 1600 hours, the horizon had ceased to exist in any ordinary sense. What once was a clean line separating sea from sky had thickened into a band of shimmering distortion that spanned the breadth of their vision. It was not cloud. It was not weather. It was something else, a veil woven of light and vibration, an architecture the unseen suddenly made visible. Taylor keyed his mic, his voice clipped and sharp. "Flight, hold position. Stay in formation. We're encountering interference." The last word was weak, insufficient, but it was the only one he had. Carol's voice came back ragged. "Leader, the whole sky is bending. It's not weather. What the hell is it?" Taylor ignored the panic, focusing on command. "Stay steady. Eyes forward. Don't chase the illusions." But illusions had become reality. The curtain loomed ahead, a vast wall of faint blue-white lattice, suspended in the air itself. It flickered like lightning frozen mid-strike, veins of geometry etched into the atmosphere. The lines pulsed in synchrony with the static crackling across their radios, each burst of sound perfectly timed with a flare of light. Inside Harland's cockpit, every hair on his arm stood on end. His body tingled, as though the air itself had become electric. He grabbed for his recorder, voice trembling. "It's not cloud. It's like a net strung across the sky. We're flying into it. We can't not fly into it." The tape hissed with background static, almost drowning his whisper. At 1605, the radios began to fold in on themselves. When Taylor gave the order to climb, "All ships, ascend 200 feet now." His voice echoed back across the net half a second later, identical but distorted, as though spoken through a tunnel of glass. Then it echoed again, 2 seconds later, weaker but still recognizable. Carol shouted, "Leader, your voice is doubling, tripling." The echo spread, contaminating all transmissions. Every acknowledgement came back layered. A real response followed by a phantom, then another, cascading until the channel became a choir of delayed repetitions. Harland's compass spun freely now, needle whipping like a broken clock hand. He tapped it once, twice, then gave up. He scrawled in his notebook, "Instruments useless. Radio infected. We're inside something." At 1610, The sun faltered. For a full 3 seconds, every pilot saw 2 suns. One high in the western sky, one lower, fractured, reflected against the sea where it had no right to be. The effect was nauseating, vertigo in full force. Carroll's radio man vomited into his mask. Another cadet screamed into the mic, his voice breaking into static. Taylor barked, "Maintain discipline. Fly the leader. Keep your eyes on me." He pulled his plane steady, muscles locked, as though sheer will could anchor the formation. But even Taylor could not explain what he saw when the second sun split into fragments, dozens of pale orbs rippling across the horizon curtain before vanishing into the lattice. The curtain grew closer, no longer distant. It surrounded them now, above, below, on every side, a dome rather than a wall. Its light painted the cockpits in a pale electric glow, skin gleaming as though illuminated from within. The static became a roar, yet under it, voices lingered. Harland froze as he recognized syllables inside the noise, his own words, recorded minutes earlier, now playing back distorted. "We're flying into it. We can't not fly into it." He gasped, fumbling for his recorder, which still spun fresh tape. Somehow the words he had just whispered were bleeding back into his headset, returning from the lattice around them. Carroll cursed. "Leader, I just heard myself answer before I spoke." Taylor's hand trembled on the yoke. He forced calm. "It's feedback. Ignore it. Stay on me." But deep inside, even Taylor knew feedback could not explain a sun that split into shards or compasses that spun like toys. At 16:15, the formation struck the curtain. There was no collision, no impact. Instead, the world simply changed. The air thickened. The roar of engines dulled, as if muffled by water. The blue-white lattice spread across their canopies, crawling over the glass like frost. It was not outside, it was inside, threading to the cockpits, across dials and panels, wrapping every surface with geometric veins of light. Harland gasped, his skin tingling as the glow passed through his gloves, through his bones. He whispered hoarsely into his recorder, "We're inside it. It's alive. It knows we're here." The words were shaky, almost sobbed, but they survived on tape. Taylor fought to keep his voice steady. "All ships, hold tight. This is just interference. Stay in line." But the truth was undeniable. Their planes were dissolving into light, every rivet humming with resonance. The cadets no longer answered in unison. Their voices overlapped, stuttering, some responses arriving before the order was given. Time had broken. At 16:20, the ocean below flickered out of existence. Through the lattice shimmer, there was no water, no horizon, only endless corridors of shifting geometry stretching in every direction. Triangles folded into hexagons, circles into spirals, all glowing with cold, steady radiance. Harland's final words on that reel, nearly drowned by static, whispered what every man now feared. "We are not over the Atlantic anymore. We are nowhere." The curtain had closed around them, and Flight 19 was gone. For a time, none of the men knew if they were still flying. Their Avengers still hummed, propellers spinning, fuel gauges ticking. But the world outside their canopies bore no resemblance to the Atlantic. Instead, they were surrounded by corridors of light. The lattice they had pierced had unfolded into vast, repeating geometries. Triangular planes of pale blue-white light, stretched like walls, shifting and rotating as though alive. Cylinders of radiance spun in the distance, their surfaces etched with impossible glyphs that rearranged themselves before the eye could settle. Everything pulsed in rhythm. A steady thrum felt not in the ears but in the chest, in the marrow of bones. Taylor gripped his yoke tighter, sweat slicking his palms. The ocean was gone. The sky was gone. There was no horizon, only endless interlocking structures that stretched farther than his vision. His compass spun aimlessly. The altimeter ticked without sense, and the artificial horizon drifted like a drunken pendulum. "Flight! This is Leader," he said, forcing steel into his voice. "Hold formation. I say again, hold formation. Do not deviate." The responses came, but not in order. "Holding, Leader. Holding formation. Leader, Formation." Then his own voice came back, a second late. "Hold formation." Taylor's throat tightened. He had not repeated the command. In Harland's cockpit, the recorder captured it all: the overlapping, the stuttering voices, the phantom repetitions. His pencil scratched furiously across his notebook, letters jagged, not echoes. Time loops, voices arriving before or after. He whispered, barely audible, "The walls are moving. They're not walls, they're corridors. They breathe." The tape whirred, preserving the trembling words. At 16:25, the first break in discipline came. One cadet's Avenger banked sharply left, sliding away from formation. His voice erupted over the net, high with panic. "Leader, I can't. My controls aren't." His words fractured, cut off, then repeated backward, syllables inverted. The Avenger drifted sideways, yet to the eye, it seemed not to move at all, as if space itself was sliding around it. Taylor barked, "Steady, damn it! Stay in line." But the machine corrected itself before the cadet could, wings leveling without input. Carroll cursed. "Leader," his bird moved on its own. Taylor ignored it, though the tremor in his hands betrayed his fear. He forced his gaze forward, toward what resembled a corridor stretching infinitely ahead, lit with shimmering constellations that shifted shape. Harland pressed his forehead to the canopy. The geometry was not random. It curved into arches, spiraled into doorways, intersected like a cathedral built for mathematics. He muttered into his recorder, "We're not in cloud. We're not in storm. We're inside something. A machine. A labyrinth made of light." The engine still droned, but the sound had changed. It was no longer merely external. It resonated inside their bodies, vibrating skulls, echoing in teeth. Carroll slapped his headset off, but the sound remained, humming through bone. At 16:30, the labyrinth shifted again. What had been a corridor became a chamber. The bombers floated or flew, if flying still meant anything, through a vast expanse where hexagons stacked like honeycomb, each cell alive with flickering arcs. The sensation of motion warped. Planes side by side appeared offset, one higher, one lower, though their wings nearly touched. Carroll shouted, "Leader, they're not what they look, they're sliding." Taylor tried to answer, but his words fractured. Stay, formation." His own voice split, fragments overlapping, some arriving before his lips even moved. Harland scribbled frantically, "We are not aligned in the same space. Each plane is in its own corridor, only appearing together." His hands shook, graphite smudging the page. The labyrinth pulsed, brighter now. Shapes detached from the walls. Shards of light that hovered, flickering, orbiting the Avengers like curious sparks. They traced the fuselages, scanning rivets, crawling over canopies. One hovered in front of Harland's face, a diamond of fire that rotated with impossible precision. He couldn't breathe. He whispered into the recorder, "It's looking at me." The shard darted away, vanishing back into the wall as though satisfied. Carroll's panicked breathing filled the net. "Leader, request a break. Request a turn back." Taylor snapped, "Negative. We hold." But his eyes betrayed him. He could see the truth. There was no back. The curtain had sealed. The labyrinth offered only forward. At 16:37, Harland captured the most haunting fragment yet. On the tape, amid static and overlapping voices, came a phrase that no one admitted to speaking. The language was English, but the tone was cold, metallic, perfectly even. "Stay aligned. Do not scatter. The machine requires order." The words did not belong to Taylor. They did not belong to any cadet. Harland's hand froze mid-scribble. His note trailed off. Another voice. "Not ours." The labyrinth pulsed once more brighter, and the Avengers were pulled deeper into its living geometry. Taylor's final order of the hour, his voice ragged, was captured across every cockpit. "We stay together. God help us, we stay together." But already the men of Flight 19 understood. They were not the ones commanding formation anymore. Something else was. Inside the labyrinth, Flight 19 discovered that sound itself no longer obeyed the rules of air. The pilots, trained to measure their universe in decibels and frequencies, began to realize that their words traveled in loops, overlapping themselves like faulty recordings. Check altitude. Taylor barked, but the word altitude came back twice, once clipped, once elongated, vibrating through the cockpit as if the aircraft itself had chosen to repeat him. Harland felt it most acutely. His headphones filled not only with the voices of the other pilots, but with a chorus of himself. His own breath rattled back through the wire mesh, his questions returning seconds before he asked them. Say again? Say again? Say again. The third echo was never his. It carried a hollow resonance, like a voice filtered through water. He pressed the microphone switch. This is Harland, reporting. The echo cut in. Harland, reporting. Harland, reporting. Harland, reporting. Not a replay. A participation. Taylor forced structure onto the chaos. He commanded a right turn, then a left, then a climb to 1,500 feet. Each order bounced back delayed, half garbled, and carried out unevenly. Ensign Parker's plane dipped 30 degrees too far. Lieutenant Collins climbed when he should have banked. The formation fragmented into 5 glowing points adrift within corridors of light. Harland wrote furiously in his logbook, even as turbulence shook the cockpit. Radios now transmit before and after speech. Time out of sequence. Voices layering, some unidentified. One entry underlined 3 times. Voices not belonging to crew present. The light outside the canopy thickened. It no longer resembled atmosphere, but instead sheets of transparent glass stacked on one another, vibrating faintly. Each vibration carried sound. Each sound carried a reflection of their words. Parker shouted, "Taylor, where the hell are we?" Echo, "Hell are we?" Then a new voice, "Where are we, Taylor?" None of them had spoken that last one. Taylor's breathing grew ragged. Maintain discipline. Hold formation. I don't care what you hear. But they did care. Harland's hand shook as he adjusted dials that no longer responded. The altimeter needle spun lazily, like a compass set beside a magnet. Even the stopwatch clipped to his kneeboard ticked in bursts, then halted, then raced forward. The cockpit smelled of ozone, like a thunderstorm hidden inside the hull. He could feel static crawling over his skin beneath the flight jacket, raising hairs and waves. He spoke into the recorder he had hidden in his lap. Entry 8. We are inside a structure of reflections. Our voices are multiplied. I have heard speech not belonging to any man aboard. His voice cracked, and the recorder answered before he finished. Any man aboard. Collins broke discipline first. Taylor, my plane, my controls don't match my hands. I'm banking right, but instruments say left. Taylor snapped back. Trim. Hold trim. But the echo responded, left, 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 until it became a chant. Parker screamed over frequency. Who's on this channel? Identify yourself. Silence. Then, faintly, Parker, Parker, Parker. The echoes became more than audio. They folded into vision. Through the canopy, Harland glimpsed copies of the formation. 5 planes repeated in translucent layers, each at a different angle, slightly offset, like film frames misaligned on projector. One layer showed Parker's Avenger flying level. Another showed it inverted. A third depicted it climbing vertically, dissolving into the ceiling of light. Which one is real? Harland muttered. The recorder answered, real, real, real. The labyrinth shifted. Corridors that had once stretched ahead now closed, their edges folding like origami. A new passage opened to the right, lined with pulsating lattice beams. Taylor, voice iron-hard despite the madness, ordered them through. Bank right. Follow my lead. The formation attempted the maneuver. Harland's stomach lurched as his Avenger obeyed both instantly and with delay. 2 movements at once. The airframe groaned. For a heartbeat, he thought the wings would shear off. But the plane leveled within the new corridor. Outside, the lattice vibrated faster, and the echoes intensified until every cockpit carried a storm of overlapping speech, commands, screams, whispers, some recognizable, some alien. Harland tried again to write. His pencil dragged across the page, leaving jagged marks. The words formed themselves, not echoes, responses. He dropped the pencil. His hand continued moving, sketching circles and angles that glowed faintly even under lamplight. Symbols not his own. Taylor's voice broke through. Stay with me. Whatever this is, we stay together. That's an order. The echo returned, not delayed but simultaneous. Stay together. Stay together. Then, a fraction later, another voice layered atop his. Hollow, resonant, mechanical. We stay together. The air in Harland's cockpit thickened, congealed. He felt pressure in his chest, as though the atmosphere itself demanded agreement. Yes, he whispered, not knowing to whom. The echo approved. Yes. Flight 19 pressed deeper into the living corridors of light. The labyrinth had claimed their radios, their instruments, their echoes. Now it began to claim their will. Harland switched off the recorder. The red light blinked once, twice, then continued glowing on its own. It whispered, Entry 9, and began to record without him. The first signs of separation began as a slight widening of the formation, the kind of drift any squadron leader could correct with a sharp order and steady discipline. But here, in this corridor of shifting light and echoing voices, correction meant nothing. Each attempt only deepened the fracture. Taylor's voice was clipped and iron-bound as always. Flight 19, tighten up, hold my wing. Harland obeyed instantly. Banking left to close the gap. But when he glanced through the canopy, Parker's Avenger was not where it should have been. In one layer of vision, Parker's craft flew parallel to his own, steady and true. In another, superimposed, it lagged several hundred yards behind. A third image showed it climbing into a ceiling of glass-like lattice that should not have been there. 3 Parkers. 3 realities. Sir, he's not aligned, Harland said. The recorder in his lap blinked red, capturing his panic. The playback whispered at once. Aligned. Not aligned. Aligned. The horizon fractured next. Collins shouted first. I've got ocean, straight below. Dark blue, sun glinting. But Ensign O'Hara contradicted him instantly. Negative. Sand. Wide desert stretching. I see dunes out to the horizon. Harland gripped his stick tighter. To him, the world outside was neither water nor sand, but a black expanse dotted with faint stars, as if the canopy had been turned into a planetarium dome. They were no longer sharing the same world. Taylor's voice snapped across the channel. Eyes forward. Fly my lead. What you see is interference. Ignore it. The echo followed, in layered voices. Fly my lead. Ignore it. Ignore it. But then came another command, stronger, deeper, not Taylor's at all. Break formation. Divide. Harland's blood went cold. Sir, did you hear that? No reply from Taylor. Only the whisper of his own voice returning, distorted. Hear that. Hear that. Hear that. Harland looked at his instruments for grounding, for something solid. Instead, he found betrayal. The compass needle swung left, then froze, then pointed behind him. The altimeter reported 3 different readings in sequence. 1,200 feet, 6,400 feet, 0. Even the clock betrayed them. Its second hand ticked forward 3 notches, then back 1, then paused for long moments. Captain, Parker cried out, I can't hold my position. My plane is splitting. Harland caught a glimpse. Parker's Avenger existed in multiple states, shimmering, each version slightly misaligned. The fuselage looked transparent, ribs and bulkheads visible as though the skin had been peeled away. For a horrifying instant, Harland thought he saw Parker himself duplicated inside the cockpit. 3 shadows of the same man overlapping. Taylor fought to reassert order. All aircraft check in. Collins, aye. O'Hara, aye. Then silence. Parker, respond. Silence again. Davis, report. The silence stretched. But Harland's radar still displayed 5 signals, each steady, each marked as friendly aircraft. He felt nausea swell in his gut. Were they 5 planes or fragments of one, split into echoes? The radio crackled. This is Parker. Relief surged until Parker's voice fractured into 2 versions. One said, Holding your wing, sir. The other overlapped. I am falling into sand. Which is real, Harland whispered. The recorder responded in its mechanical murmur. Both. Harland presses microphone. Taylor, the echoes are giving commands. They told us to break formation. The colonel's reply was ice. We don't listen to phantoms. We hold. That's the difference between discipline and death. Yet even as he said it, his voice doubled. The echo repeated him, but shifted the last word. The difference between discipline and birth. The corridor itself joined the fracture. What had once been straight ahead, now bent like a corridor in a funhouse mirror. Its lattice walls folded inward, then outward, then split into branching tunnels. Each pilot seemed to see a different exit. Collins, clear opening, 12 o'clock high. O'Hara, it's below us, sir. Looks like a runway of light. Harland saw neither. To him, the exit opened directly to star-speckled void, no ground, no sea. He realized in horror that if they followed their individual perceptions, the squadron would scatter into different realities. Taylor, Harland pleaded, you have to pick one. Pick one now. Taylor's voice shook for the first time. I see ocean ahead. That's our heading. The echo replied with mocking certainty. Ocean ahead. Sand ahead. Void ahead. The turbulence grew violent. Harland's plane shuddered, as though caught between currents pulling in opposite directions. He bit down hard, tasting blood in his mouth. The canopy outside rippled like a pond surface disturbed by stone. Through that ripple, he glimpsed another Avenger, his own. It mirrored his movement exactly. But its pilot's face was not his. The figure wore his helmet, his mask, his insignia, yet the eyes glowed faintly blue-white, not human. The double-mouthed words Harland could not hear, then dissolved back into the rippling wall. He clutched the yoke, breath ragged. Captain, there's something else here with us. The echo confirmed, in 3 voices at once. With us, with us, with us. Then came the most chilling moment. The radio carried Taylor's voice, steady, familiar. Hold your course. We fly true. A second later the same voice returned, slightly deeper layered. Hold your course. We fly apart. A third followed, mechanical, alien, vibrating. Hold your course. We fly into alignment. Harland's pulse thundered. Which Taylor was the real one? Which command to follow? The fracture was no longer just around them. It had invaded their chain of command, their very identities. Sir, request confirmation. Harland shouted. Which order is real? Silence. Then Parker's broken voice again, stretched in like tape warping in heat. I don't know where I am anymore. The radar still showed 5 planes, but Harland was certain at least one of them was already gone. The fracture widened into something irreparable. What had begun as echoes, mere distortions of radio chatter, now hardened into competing authorities. Each voice sounded like Taylor, but no two said the same thing. Flight 19, climb to 2,000 feet, came the first command, sharp and familiar. Almost immediately another Taylor, deeper, overlapped. Descend to 800, stay low, stay hidden. And then a third. Bank left 30 degrees, corridor open there. Harland's ears rang with contradiction. His hand hovered over the stick, waiting for consensus that would never come. The other planes, each guided by their pilot's instinct to which Taylor to obey, began to shear apart. Collins called in. Copy climb, sir. 2,000 feet. His Avenger rose sharply, disappearing into a vein of light above. O'Hara countered, panic in his tone. Negative. You said 800. Dropping down now. His engine roared as he plunged. Parker screamed, Left turn! Left turn! Corridor's opening, I see it. His plane banked, wings flashing as it vanished down a glowing tunnel that none of the others could see. Harland sat paralyzed. His gauges spun like toy dials in a storm. The compass pointed toward 3 separate headings in jagged succession. Even the horizon line had split. Ocean, desert, and void stacked like panes of broken glass. He pressed his mic. Captain, we need one command. One real command. The replies arrived layered, indistinguishable. Climb. Descend. Turn. Align. The formation was gone. Through his canopy, Harland saw only shadows of the other Avengers. each one flickering in and out like film projections misaligned. Sometimes there were 5, sometimes 2, sometimes none. His heart hammered. He was alone yet surrounded. "Taylor, were you?" For the first time, no echo answered. The labyrinth around him shifted again. Corridors split open, each a different color of light. One shimmered ocean blue, rippling like waves suspended vertically. Another burned desert gold, dunes stretching infinitely into the glow. A third pulsed with a deep starlit blackness, speckled with galaxies. Harland realized each pilot had followed one of these paths. Flight 19 was no longer one squadron, but scattered across dimensions of choice. His stomach lurched as turbulence struck. The yoke fought against his hands, jerking left, then right, as though the plane itself were undecided. The recorder in his lap blinked red. Without his touch, it spoke, "Choose." He forced a breath. Not without orders. Not without Taylor. The machine countered. Taylor is divided. Harland's hand trembled as he wrote in his logbook. Captain fragmented. Multiple commands at once. Squadron splitting across 3 separate vectors. But the words blurred as he wrote them, splitting into 3 versions across the page, each recording a different command. Another voice filled his headphones, this one distinctly not Taylor's. Cold, resonant, metallic. The one who leads has been divided. Each fragment is true. Each must be obeyed. Each will complete alignment. Harland's throat tightened. "Who are you?" The reply was immediate. "The conductor." The plane jolted violently. Outside, the blue corridor flared with lightning. For a second, Harland glimpsed Collins's Avenger, inverted and glowing, as if made of glass. Collins himself was frozen at the controls, his face smeared into a blur. Then it was gone, replaced by desert gold. The yoke slammed forward, nearly tearing from Harland's grip. He pulled back with everything he had, muscles straining. Sweat stung his eyes. "I can't hold it," he whispered. The recorder answered, "You don't need to. Alignment will hold you." The compass was a final betrayal. Its needle no longer pointed north, east, or west. Instead, it aligned to something outside the map, spinning until it locked on a direction that didn't exist, a vector of pure light forming a narrow beam through the canopy. The glow pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. Harland stared, frozen. This isn't navigation. This is command. The echo, for once unified, agreed, "Command! Command! Command!" Static roared. Taylor's voice returned, but this time not fractured. Calm. Solid. "Flight 19, follow me." Harland's chest filled with desperate relief. "Copy, Captain." "Where are you?" The answer chilled him. "I am where the compass points." The glow outside sharpened, a spear of lattice light piercing forward. The compass needle vibrated, then held fast. Harland's hand moved on its own. The yoke turned. The Avenger slid toward the impossible heading. He didn't know if Taylor had truly spoken, or if the labyrinth itself had perfected its imitation. But discipline had been drilled into his bones since the first day of flight school. You obey command. Even if command was fractured, even if command no longer belonged to a man. The recorder whispered as the Avenger aligned with the beam. "Entry 10, Captain divided. Squadron scattered. Compass points toward geometry. Obeying anyway." Harland's last conscious thought before the corridor consumed him was not of fear, but of inevitability, as though the fracture had always been waiting. For a moment after he aligned to the impossible heading, Harland thought the airplane had died. The engine still turned, gauges still twitched. The propeller, a translucent disk, still sighed the strange air. But sound, true sound, fell away, as if someone had placed thick felt over the world. The familiar piston thunder that usually lived in his spine receded to a memory of vibration. Even a rattle in the canopy frame, a petty companion on every sortie, quieted like a child warned by a glance. He eased the throttle forward a hair. The lever moved with the same resistance it always had. The RPM needle obeyed. His body felt the change as pressure rather than noise, a deepening thrum in bones and teeth. It was like flying inside a vacuum packed with resonance. "Foxterre 3-1, this is Harland," he tried, voice low, more to test reality than to hail a man. Say position. Silence returned, courteous and absolute. Then, a half-breath later, his own voice replied in the headphones, his cadence, his rasp. Say position. The phrase echoed again, softer. Say position, and then a version with unfamiliar emphasis. Position. He tasted copper. He had not transmitted twice. He tried Taylor. Leader, I'm on the bearing indicated by. He stopped himself from saying by the compass. That word had grown treacherous. By the light. State altitude. Nothing. Then, state altitude. State altitude. State. The third iteration dragged, vowels stretching like warm wax. He reached for the recorder, a reflex stronger than training, and found the red jewel already aglow. He had not pressed it. The reels turned with patient confidence. He felt ridiculous clearing his throat for a machine, but speaking into it, not into the net, made the air less empty. Entry 11, he whispered, following the beam. No visual on the others. Engine sound suppressed. Radio returning duplicates, and he groped for a word that did not commit him to superstition. Variations. The labyrinth kept him honest. Variations. The recorder affirmed, as if pleased with the choice. Ahead. The beam of lattice. No. Not light. Not in a human sense, but a direction you would see, narrowed to a bright thread that pierced the corridor's far end. The walls changed with his motion, like the interior of a cut diamond rotated by an invisible hand. Hexagons lapped into spirals. The spirals unfurled into frames that suggested arches. The arches gave way to a plane of points that trembled in sympathetic rhythm with his pulse. He did not steer. He merely refused to unsteer. The Avenger floated as if in dense water, his control surfaces effective but outranked. His panel clock read 1651. His wristwatch read 1647. The little navigator stopwatch on the kneeboard showed nothing a watchmaker would recognize. The second hand ticked in bursts. 3 quick, 1 long pause, 2 quick, and sometimes when it moved backward. Harland found he could not be angry at it. It looked like a creature learning to walk. Leader, he said softly, not pressing the mic, I'm still here. Saying it aloud helped. The words fogged the inside of his mask. He tried the net again. This is 3-1. If you can't answer, key twice. The old trick, the comfort procedure. Silence. Then a soft glove click-click sounded in his ear. Relief surged as if a hand had squeezed his shoulder. Leader, is that you? Is that you? That you? You? The corridor replied, gently mocking. He clenched his jaw until it hurt. The 8 gave him something to measure. Something glimmered at the corridor's vanishing point, not the broad, flat glow he had been following. This was small, precise, a point of intensity like a star glimpsed through city haze. It pulsed, not with his heartbeat, but with the odd offbeat that governed this place. Each pulse spread delicate ripples across the lattice walls, as if someone had plucked an invisible string. He wrote without looking. Point ahead. Star inside structure. The graphite left a darker trail than ink would have, as if it were burnishing the page rather than marking it. He became aware of motion in his peripheral vision and nearly flinched. The canopy had learned to make mirrors. On his right, a faint reflection showed a cockpit identical to his. Kneeboard, hands, jacket creases. But the man in that canopy leaned a fraction more forward than he did. When Harland tilted his head a degree, the double did not. Its eyes, his eyes, were bright with blue-white shine that wasn't reflection. He chose not to startle it. He faced forward and pretended he had seen nothing. The echo, respectful of dignity, let the double blur away. Where are you taking me? He asked the corridor softly, not to be answered, only to hear the shape of sane language. The recorder obliged, taking me. Then lower, a voice that wore his grammar like a uniform but not his humanity. Toward alignment. Negative. He said automatically, the way men say negative when asked to do something that makes a new shape under their ribs. Negative. We don't align. We don't align. The recorder parroted in his timbre. Then that other voice overlapped. You already are. The beam tightened until it was a filament. He felt the airplane's attitude change without a corresponding motion. Instruments agreed and disagreed in dizzying succession. The artificial horizon, which his instructors had taught him to love more than his own eyes, performed an elegant slow roll while the wings outside looked level. He laughed once, softly, in the mask, a release valve against panic. The world's soundlessness deepened. It wasn't emptiness, not vacuum, not absence, but a fullness at the wrong frequency. When he moved his tongue in his mouth, he heard it with exquisite detail. When he blinked, his eyelids made a small felted sound that belonged in a library. The engine's big heart became a rumor. He found himself remembering ridiculous, kind facts. The way his mother oversalted stew, when she was nervous, the click made by the latch of the back door in winter. He narrated them, barely audible, into the recorder, because telling a machine something true about a kitchen in Nebraska might obligate physics to behave. Entry 11-2. My mother used to. His voice broke. She ruined stew when anxious. Said the salt protected it. Protected us. Protected us, the corridor murmured, unexpectedly tender. He tried the net again. Anyone say position. Position. Then, in the exact rhythm of Taylor's command voice, hold your course. Captain? Harland said, too quickly. Say again. Hold your course. That voice insisted. It was Taylor and not Taylor at once. The right syllables, the wrong temperatures. He shut his eyes for one dangerous second, so that he could hear better. Behind the imitations, beneath the echoes, there was a softer channel, a tone so low it was almost below hearing. It reminded him of the pitch a ship's hull makes in heavy seas, a sound you feel through boots into shin bones. It said nothing articulate. It conveyed agreement. All right, he whispered. All right. He let the yoke rest under his palms. He kept his feet on the rudder pedals because something in him would die if he lifted them. The beam widened by a hair, like a teacher approving a student's posture. He checked fuel out of habit and nearly laughed again. The gauge reported a number that made no sense. Consumption had flattened, or time had flattened around consumption. He tried to do the math on his kneeboard and found that division made more sense than subtraction here, that ratios might still obey. Entry 11-3, he told the recorder. If any of this is readable, tell them the burn curve changed. It's as if we're being carried in addition to propelling. He hesitated, as if we're in a current. The word, please something. The corridor brightened imperceptibly. Leader, he said on the net, if you're hearing me, I think we're, he stopped. He had been about to say, inside a machine. The phrase felt like a trespass. In a channel, a designated path. Silence. Then the good, ordinary click-click again. He chose to believe it had been two human fingers on a switch. His panel clock leapt from 1654 to 1658, as if embarrassed to have lingered. His wristwatch chilled his skin. Its second hand lay as if asleep. The stopwatch chose that moment to redeem itself. It ticked, sure and steady, for a clear 12 seconds, then stopped, then ticked again twice, like a child sulking because he had asked it to behave in front of guests. Ahead, the point brightened, not like a lamp increasing voltage, more like an aperture opening, admitting not light but permission. Around it, the lattice arranged itself into a pattern Harland's mind refused to file as random. Repeated triangles nested in hexagons nested in circles, then unwove, then returned, like a breath exercise taught by a choir director. He felt the first hint of a force other than guidance, a very slight forward pull. The yoke tingled under his fingertips. The hair on his forearms rose again and stayed. He smelled ozone and something else, hot dust, as if a projector had been running too long in a dark classroom. Leader, he said, throat tight, I have a point ahead. Single point. Looks like a star, but it's not in the sky. Star ahead. The corridor complied, and for once the echo did not split. It sounded like assent. He took inventory of his body, because a checklist is a raft. Breathing, shallow but regular. Hands, steady enough to sign his name. Feet, where they belong. Heart, punching an honest message. Fear, present and accounted for. Despair, not yet. Wonder, yes. Damn it, yes. Entry 11-4, he said, and watched his own handwriting continue on the scuff paper, while his mouth worked the words. If these tapes outlive me, I don't think the intent here is to break us. It feels like orchestration. It's terrible. He searched for a word that would not betray the men who trusted him. Beautiful. The recorder repeated beautiful in a voice that was his, and kinder than he would ever be to himself. He thought of Taylor's sentences, of their square-set shoulders and foreheads, discipline and birth. The echo had said that. He had wanted to laugh at the time, or curse. Now the phrase felt as regular as breath. He envied the part of Taylor that might already have learned to hold two orders at once without splitting. He reached to shut the recorder off, intending to preserve tape, and found his finger resting on a button that had vanished. The little box had made its own face, unbroken, luminous, patient. He withdrew his hand. "Very well," he told the air gently. "You keep it." The beam narrowed again. The point ahead sharpened from star to bead to needle eye. The corridor's walls bowed inward slightly, as if inclining to listen. For the first time since he had left the coast, Harland felt the shape of destination. "Leader," he said for the last time in that long hour, and did not wait for an answer. "I see something. I'm going to it." No echo contradicted him. The headphones filled with the soft rush of a sea that did not exist here. It sounded like Florida on a day with no wind. He aligned the nose of the Avenger to the point. The compass, poor creature, found a place to rest and quivered happily there. No cardinal letters, just a certainty. The engine's rumor deepened. The silence around it became a frame rather than a void. He thought of frames in museums, of heavy gold, of glass that kept dust off saints. He felt held. "Entry 11-5, he whispered. "Point a light ahead. If I say star, you'll misunderstand. If I say door, you'll make it into wood. If I say mouth, you'll be afraid. It's none of those. It's a correct place in a wrong world. The recorder finished for him, very soft. Going. Harland smiled without knowing he had. Not relief, not surrender. Recognition. He loosened his grip on the yoke by the thickness of a postcard and let the airplane and the channel and the stubborn part of himself that still believed in headings carry him toward the needle eye. Behind him, somewhere that might have been above or earlier, the formation's ghosts continued to argue and repeat. Before him, the point brightened a final measurable increment. He did not think of crash reports or debrief rooms. He thought of a table in a kitchen, in a world that stayed still when you set a glass on it. He thought of salt and stew, and why his mother had been right. Sometimes protection is imprecise and therefore tender. "Leader," he said, for courtesy and for love, "I have you." The net stayed kind and mute. The corridor thrummed. The point opened. When the needle eye widened enough for the Avenger to slip through, Harland braced for violence, for wings to shear away, for the engine to detonate, for his body to split between what was possible and what was not. None of that came. Instead, everything went calm. The turbulence ceased as if cut by a switch. The cockpit's tremors smoothed into glass. For the first time since leaving the coast, his instruments stopped twitching in rebellion. The altimeter held steady. The compass, though still meaningless, rested content. Even the stopwatch on his kneeboard sat with an almost smug composure, its second hand tickless but resolved. He exhaled, too loud in the strange silence. "Stabilized," he muttered, though he knew no one could hear. Or rather, no one human. The radio hissed gently, a new texture that was not static, but breath. Then a word broke through. Altitude. Just that. A single fragment, clipped and self-contained. He keyed the mic, half afraid. 1500 feet, he answered, reflexive, like reporting to an instructor. "Feet," the radio confirmed, as if satisfied. A coldness climbed his back. It was not an echo. Echoes repeated his whole sentences, bending them. This was something else, an interlocutor. The recorder on his lap rolled steadily, reels turning with mechanical calm. Harland hadn't pressed it since the point of light, but it spun, obedient to some other command. He risked listening to the faint bleed of its playback in his headphones. Not his words. Not this time. The tape whispered a log not yet spoken. Entry 12. Passage stabilized. Others absent. Radio responds with fragments. Harland snapped his head back, throat tight. He had not said that. Yet there was preserved. He tested it. Entry 12 test. The recorder continued in a parallel line, indifferent to his interruption. Flashes of companions observed. He hadn't written that either. The flashes came moments later. Ahead, beyond the canopy, the corridor of lattice thickened again. Its walls shifted like auroras folded into geometric ribs. And in those ribs, briefly, the silhouettes of other Avengers burned. Collins's tail number, Parker's profile, O'Hara's wing markings. They were right there and not there, solid for a blink, then dissolving like shadows on wet glass. Leader, Harland whispered to no one. They're alongside, in different panes. The flashes repeated. Collins's Avenger dove past on the left, nose glowing, but its cockpit was empty. Parker's appeared inverted above him, props spinning like a child's toy, then broke apart into prisms. For a fleeting second, O'Hara's canopy lined up with his own. Harland saw his comrade's face, eyes wide, mouth shaping a word. No sound reached him. Then O'Hara vanished, leaving behind only the afterimage of light like chalk on black paper. Harland's hands shook on the yoke. You're still here, he said, desperate. All of you, we're still together. The radio breathed back. Together. He swallowed hard. If you're listening, hold course. Keep aligned. Silence. Then aligned. The word chilled him less than it should have. It felt approving. He returned to the recorder, seeking anchor and habit. Entry 12-2. Contact minimal. Other aircraft visible, in flashes only. Radio offers fragments, single words. Recorder continues log without input. The reels purred on. Immediately the playback returned in that alien timbre, lower and resonant. Agreement sustains you. The phrase was so clean, so deliberate, that Harland forgot to breathe. Who said that? Agreement sustains you. His blood iced. This was not his echo, not the corridor's playful repetition. It was a direct address, a statement. He groped for discipline. He had been trained to treat every signal as real until proven false. Roger, he said hoarsely, because some part of him feared refusal more than submission. Agreement acknowledged. The cockpit responded. The lattice outside pulsed brighter, steadier. The turbulence receded even further until it felt like he was flying through syrup, held and cradled. His instruments stopped wavering altogether. Even the stopwatch found a rhythm. 5 ticks, a pause. 5 ticks, like the measured beat of a metronome. Agreement had consequences. The radio tested him again. Fuel. He answered without hesitation. 3 hours indicated. Indicated. The voice returned, then fell quiet. The recorder advanced. Entry 12-3. Pack confirmed. Voice responds to operational queries. Companion still flashing. Duration unknown. Packed. He hadn't said packed. The word fit too well. He saw more shadows. Collins again, breaking apart into 3 intersecting planes. Parker's Avenger hovering upside down, tail number backward, then dissolving. O'Hara's face again, closer, mouthing a single syllable. Looked like yes. He realized, with a hollow ache, that the others had made their agreements too, each on a different channel, each sustained in their own pain. The labyrinth did not require consensus. It required obedience. Entry 12-4, he forced himself to say. I no longer believe our radios are misbehaving. They are being shared. Not echoes, not interference. An administration. He shivered at the word. We are reporting and we are being judged. The recorder accepted his note and gave its own. Judge sufficient. He sat back, heartbeat rattling. His own log had been overruled. The cockpit dimmed subtly, shadows lengthening though no sun had moved. For a moment, he felt he was inside a cathedral built of living glass. The beam ahead continued, leading him deeper, toward another aperture, larger this time. He knew instinctively that without agreement, the path would have closed. The voice returned, no longer through headphones, but intimate, as if spoken inside his helmet. Agreement sustains you. And this time, Harland whispered back with his own will, not habit, not fear. Yes. The lattice brightened, and the Avenger carried him onward, bound in the first true covenant of Flight 19. The second aperture did not open like the first. It rotated. Harland watched the far end of the corridor swivel along an axis that had no place to be, as if someone were turning a page with a finger he could not see. The lattice ribs along the walls re-indexed themselves, snapping into new ratios that briefly flashed with numerals he did not recognize. Base not 10, not even a base that belonged to fingers. When the aperture aligned, it revealed not more corridor, but reflection, not a pane of glass. Something worse. A volume of mirror, a room made a return. He entered because the channel allowed it, and because the pact, he had begun to think of it as a pact, whether or not he used the word aloud, held him in its soft clamp. The air thickened again, not hostile, simply deliberate, as if pressure were a form of attention. Every surface in the cockpit took on a polish that was not physical. The radio face, the altimeter bezel, the tiny convex head of a screw, each returned to himself but slightly late. His breath fogged the mask. In the little crescent of clarity, he saw his own eyes. A beat later, he saw them blink in the wrong rhythm. He forced his training to the surface. Instrument cross-check, he said, to keep the mind on rails. Altitude steady. Fuel steady. Cylinder head temps good. Oil pressure. He paused. The needle held on a number that was not on the dial. The headphone sigh answered with one word. Sufficient. Copy sufficient, he said, because acknowledgement was the only safe currency here. The recorder spun without asking. He did not look at it. It made him think of a quiet clerk writing everything down in a ledge-bound hand, pausing only to sand the page. The first true mirror rose outside the canopy, like a column grown from water. It was not glass. It was a region in which light preferred to return. His Avenger slid past it, and for a breath he saw two aircraft, nose to nose, the same chip paint at the cowling, the same leading-edge scuffs. But the cockpit in the returning craft was empty. He felt absurdly embarrassed, as though he had come to an appointment out of uniform, and found his better self there waiting in full dress. Then the mirror changed its mind. The cockpit filled with him, not as he knew himself, but the man as the channel understood him. Helmet perfect, posture exemplary, jaw set into doctrine. The eyes, though, were not his. They were lit from within by a cold geometry, blue-white and patient. The mouth moved. He could not hear the words, yet his bones felt them like a tuning fork. You are late. His lips twitched. Late for what? The cockpit copy, his tilted its head, as if considering whether to encourage a student. The voice arrived the way thunder arrives after heat lightning. Agreement sustains you. Discipline aligns you. He groped for the net, for the comfort of human disobedience. Leader, this is 3-1, in a mirrored volume. Request guidance. Silence. Then 2 soft clicks, the good ones. He closed his eyes in gratitude that was almost religious, whether it was Taylor or the structure extending him mercy. He did not care for that breath. When he opened them, the volume had populated. Mirrors in the walls, in the floor, in the curve of the canopy. Each returned a different moment of him. Harland, age 6, holding a balsa glider. Harland, age 12, grease under fingernails in a farm truck, stealing a look at the sky between chores. Harland last winter, the first time an instructor shouted, "Hold your heading," loud enough to make his left hand shake. Harland now, older than his years, eyes carrying a weight he had not earned but was willing to lift. It would have been easy to call it a hallucination, but the mirrors were not offering sentiment. They were inventorying angles. The boy with the glider held his arms at a degree that matched the present bank of the Avenger. The farm kid's greasy fingers traced a curve that echoed the arc of the channel outside. The instructor's shout had set a line in the jaw that perfectly mapped the vector of the beam. He wrote, because writing held the wolves back. Mirrors show not faces, but compliance, angles, postures, the history of how I have held lines. The recorder approved. He could feel approval now as a small warm behind the ears, and add a line of its own, cool and just conductor potential rising. He had been around radios long enough to know when a frequency wanted him to flinch. He refused it. "I am a pilot," he said softly. "I am not your wire." The corridor did not punish him. The lattice brightened, almost fond. The word pilot seemed to please it. The word wire made it stir. Entry 12-5, he tried, catching himself, then corrected. 13. I am, he stopped. There was danger in the wrong pronoun. The aircraft remained controllable. The channel remains permissive. The mirrors are diagnostic. He wanted to add I will not be made, and could not find a grammar that did not concede too much. The radio picked a different combat. Names, it said. His stomach turned. He glanced instinctively at the canopy, as if his comrades might be scrawled there. The pact had been made with fragments. This felt like the call to tithe. He chose instead the names that no debrief would ever ask for. Mary Ellen, he said into the mask. His mother, Ethan, the boy from a farm 2 down, who built kites out of sacks and sticks. Chief Alvarez, the mechanic who had pretended not to see the little recorder in his jacket pocket a week ago. Instructor Gray, who had shouted him into competence and then hugged his shoulder in a hallway where no one would see. The mirrors accepted them the way a good clerk accepts a bill of lading. Nod. Enter, stamp, move the cargo on. Agreement sustains you. The other voice said again, but it was different this time, almost human with the weight of those names inside it. Harland felt his jaw loosen. He found he was crying without drama. The tears did not irritate his eyes in this air. They cooled like condensation and vanished. A figure moved in the mirror to his left. He turned to quickly and made the plane wobble, habit rebuke, and corrected. Collins emerged from the reflection first. Perfect for a heartbeat. Hand raised in a salute that might have been farewell or obedience. Then O'Hara, jaw cocked like a man telling a joke he had just realized wasn't one. Parker last, upside down, grinning through terror, as some men can. Their mouths shaped a word he could not hear, but the shape was familiar. Together. Together, he said before he could choose it. The volume brightened. The engine's rumor deepened. His gauges, beloved, treacherous, held. He let himself pretend for 3 breaths that he was flying a pattern over warm blue water with ordinary boys who would become ordinary men. The mirror ahead darkened. Something large moved behind it. For an instant he thought he saw the phantom silhouette of a future age, a jet he had never studied, streak across. Then the outline rewrote itself into a torpedo bomber again. The channel, perhaps, was translating for kindness. The voice, not the recorder now, not the radio, but the thing that wore grammar like a uniform, spoke without sound. He heard the way a bridge hears a marching column and calculates stress. Hold the line you were built to hold. You will be permitted to pass. He almost laughed, a small cracked sound that embarrassed him. Built, he said. Sir, with respect, I was growing out of core and worry. The lattice flickered humor, and then steadied. Agreement sustains you. Discipline aligns you. Memory qualifies you. The beam sharpened. The second aperture rotated another quarter turn, exposing a darkness that was not absence but depth. The mirrors dimmed until they were gentle ghosts. He took stock. Fuel sufficient, airframe warm and honest, breath regular. Fear held without letting it hold him. He had done harder things with worse tools. Just never for this long in a place where the sky preferred math to weather. He pressed the mic out of love. Not hope. Leader. 3-1. Proceeding. If you can't come, stand by. I'll mark the way if there's a way to mark. 2 clicks. He closed his eyes again. Taylor, or the shape that had loved Taylor long enough to answer for him. Either was enough. The recorder ticked its reels forward with a patience that had become companionship. It spoke once more, softly, in a phrase fitted into the cockpit with the right weight. Agreement sustains you. He gave it back the other half, because doctrine is a duet or it is nothing. Discipline aligns me. Then, after a breath that did not tremble, he added the new clause that the mirrors had purchased for him. Memory qualifies me. The corridor's ribs hummed as if a string section had found its key. He eased the yoke forward into the depth. Somewhere, above, before, aside, the others moved in pains that did not tear. The channel did not consume. It sorted. The pact had not saved them. It had held them long enough to finish the long turn. He realized, as the darkness admitted him, that he was not a wire and not a resistor and not a saint. He was what the Navy had made and his life had allowed, a man who could hold a line even when the world became mirrors. The aperture closed behind like a polite door. He did not look back. Harland realized, with a pang that felt sharper than turbulence, that his kneeboard had grown thicker. At first he thought the strap had shifted, pulling the leather-bound board awkwardly against his thigh. But when he glanced down, he saw pages that had not been there before. Not his flight plan, not his pencil sketches of bearings and fuel curves, but sheets as thin as onion skin, crisp and unfamiliar. They bore his handwriting, except he had never written them. The first page read like a log, altitude nominal, fuel consistent, echoes persistent but stabilized. The lines were neat, block letters steady, free of the tremors that his hand had carried since the first corridor. The second page went further, and here his throat closed. Pilot displays control fear, but maintains doctrine, still receptive to authority. Compliance potential, high. He had never thought that phrase, yet it was in his hand. He snatched the top sheet, crumpled it hard, shoved it between boot and fuselage wall. Relief stung him, absurd and temporary. But when he looked back, the kneeboard had replenished. The sheet lay fresh and unblemished, the words arranged as before. The dossier wrote itself. "Recorder," he hissed, though he had not keyed the mic. "This is unauthorized entry in my hand." The radio replied instantly, not echo but judgment. "Recorded, archived." His scalp prickled. "Not archived." He snapped, like a student arguing with a cruel examiner. "I didn't authorize this." The voice low and patient. Authorization irrelevant. Subject observed. He tried again, this time into the little cassette deck, willing his voice to overlap the phantom logs. Entry 14. Unauthorized documents appearing. They know things I haven't said. The recorder, obedient in its own alien way, resumed in its gentle whisper. Entry 14 acknowledged. Supplement appended. The new page arrived before his eyes, graphite already dark on paper. Subject believes secrecy possible. Misapprehension corrected. Honesty improving. The air in the cockpit thickened again. It was not violence. It was a pressure of scrutiny, like sitting for an oral board where every silence had weight. He clenched his jaw. "You're evaluating me." "Correct." "On what grounds?" "Sufficiency." The new sheets continued, multiplying like carbon copies on a duplicator he could not see. One page bore data points. Headings, altitudes, fuel estimates, ordinary entries, but cross-checked with details from memory he had never committed to paper. His first solo flight, the precise speed at which he had stalled and recovered, the number of seconds he had hesitated before advancing throttle. Another sheet contained fragments of thought he had not spoken aloud, not even in prayer. "When I was 12, I nearly drowned in the irrigation ditch. I still dream of lungs full of dark water." His heart lurched. That was true. He had never told anyone. The dossier had no interest in shame. It presented the memory as clinical fact, next to engine RPMs and altitude changes. It was inventory. He tore at the paper again, shredded the sheet, threw the scraps down at the rudder pedals. They dissolved before they landed, their graphite bleeding upward into the air like vapor. A fresh copy settled neatly on the kneeboard, margin ruler straight. "Stop," he whispered, half a plea. The radio clicked twice, calm as an instructor correcting a checklist. "Cannot stop. Must archive." His pulse thundered. He thought of interrogation rooms, of colonels asking questions with clean pens and clean eyes. The dread was the same, but this had no human malice, only process. He tried defiance. He pulled a pencil from its slot, scrawled across the page in ugly lines. "This is false. These words are not mine." The letters gleamed for a moment, then rearranged themselves letter by letter until a line read, "Subject resists." Resistance documented. Value increased. Harland's breath hitched. They had not erased his protest. They had included it. He could not win. Every strike against the record only expanded it. "God help me," he muttered. The recorder spun. Help acknowledged. Invocation archived. The dossier thickened with alarming speed. He flipped ahead and saw not just present entries, but predictions. Subject will attempt to destroy evidence. Subject will attempt to pray again. Subject will eventually accept alignment. His skin burned cold. He pressed the mic, voice cracking. Leader, this is 3-1. I've got unauthorized logs. They're writing my thoughts before I think them. Silence. Then the two soft clicks again. His relief broke into a sob. He strangled. Taylor was alive, or at least the idea of Taylor was still being mirrored back. He stared down at the dossier. His tears fell on the paper, beating. The ink or graphite, or whatever it was, swallowed the moisture and reshaped the letters. Subject weeps. Emotional honesty archived. Sufficiency improving. He let the yoke drift in his hands. He was being graded like a cadet. No, worse. He was being assembled. Every private thought, every instinct, every rebellion fed the ledger. The cockpit smelled faintly of scorched paper, though none burned. He squeezed his eyes shut, whispered into the mask, "What happens when I'm sufficient?" The reply came in a voice not human, not echo, not machine. Clear, clean, you are sufficient. Harland froze. His stomach turned inside out. The words didn't repeat. They didn't layer. They hung in the air like a verdict. For the first time, the corridor did not echo him. It didn't need to. The Avengers shuddered once, as though confirming a transition. The pages on his kneeboard stilled. The pencil rolled neatly into its slot. The dossier was complete. The declaration lingered in the cockpit, like a chord left ringing on a piano. You are sufficient. It did not echo. It did not fracture. It did not ask permission to be believed. It simply existed, and in existing, rearranged the room. 4-3 heartbeats. Everything went dark. Not night, erasure. The panel lamps winked out. The radio face dulled to blank metal. The compass became a hole. The corridor outside lost its lattice and became a volume of velvet. So thick and perfect Harland felt his pupils trying to drink it. He thought, in the old childish voice that survives every uniform, I broke it. He didn't touch a switch. He didn't dare. He understood that any human gesture would be a vote of no confidence. He held still with the discipline of a man under the hands of a surgeon. Then the lights returned, not as they had been. The altimeter face showed numbers, but not in any script he knew. The digits were clean, serifless, and sat on the dial as if they had been painted by a steady, immaculate hand a century from now. The needles did not sweep. They chose positions, moving in crisp increments like the second hand of a precise clock. The artificial horizon no longer pretended to be a little airplane between bands of color. It was a circle with a line that pivoted, an axis drawn through a soft halo. When he tilted the yoke a fraction, the axis responded with the polite intelligence of a well-trained animal. The radio did not regain its green glow. Instead, the panel seemed to thin, and beneath the metal Harland saw a slow pulse, like distant embers in a stove. When he leaned closer, the pulse resolved into filaments of blue-white tracing, nested loops and arcs that rearranged themselves too quickly for his language and too slowly for his panic. He whispered, because the cockpit asked for quiet. I copy. The recorder rolled. It did not mimic this time. It did not preface with entry. It spoke with an accent that might have been designed just for him. Neutral, careful, almost tender with grammar. We will speak in what you call sentences. We will not speak long. Speaking changes the shape of the room. He swallowed, understood. The word came out like a promise. He hadn't had time to read. Your ledger is closed. The recorder continued. Not because there is no more to measure, but because measurement has achieved its purpose. Harland forced air down into his lungs. What was the purpose? A pause. The corridor outside pulsed once, like a creature considering its answer, to discover whether you can carry more than one kind of order at once. He almost laughed. It came out as a breath with teeth in it. Sir, with respect, I barely carry the one I was issued. You are sufficient. He let the words sit. They warmed inside of the mask. For what? No answer. Instead, the panel clock, which had been sulking, woke with a single deliberate tick. He reached for his logbook, because ritual is a place to stand. The familiar flap of leather buckled him to himself. He opened to the last page he had written. Fuel figures, headings, a little smear of graphite where his hand had shaken during the drift. And there, centered in the white space, not ink and not pencil but light line on paper like frost, were words. You are not alone. He exhaled so hard the mask popped slightly from his face. He touched the letters. They were not raised, not cold, not warm. When he shadowed them with his hand, they retained their glow. If he looked with the soft part of his vision, they seemed to be behind the paper, as if the page had been used like a pain to admit something more honest than print. Leader, he said on instinct, thumb finding the transmit switch. I have a message. In the logbook. He wanted to say on the logbook, but the preposition wasn't right. It says he stopped. Saying the words aloud would risk making them smaller. The headphones filled with breath. Then a sound like a man laying a hand flat on a table. 2 deliberate clicks. He closed his eyes. He gave his captain the words, anyway. It says, I am not alone. The corridor replied in its own medium. The ribs brightened in a wave that ran forward and back, as if approval could be conducted. The beam ahead sharpened and widened simultaneously, an optical paradox that felt like mercy. The recorder, careful not to step on the sanctity of the sentence, added a contour. The message is for you. The message is from you. He frowned. Negative. I didn't write this. You will have. He tasted the metallic edge of that tense shift. Time doesn't, he began and let the sentence go. Time here had already dismissed him as a provincial. He wrote anyway, because sometimes your rebellion is to use a pencil. Logbook, unauthorized inscription luminous. Content, you are not alone. Then he added, without irony, received. For a breath, the cockpit seemed to lean closer. He realized, a little crazily, that he had made the room happy. Outside the canopy, the corridor of lattice changed key. It had been humming in a register he associated with engine rooms and storm bulkheads. Now it rose a third and sweetened. The walls themselves seemed thinner, not in strength. A sailor knows a lie of thin steel, but in self-importance. He caught brief, clean flashes in the lattice like sun-off tiny mirrors. 3 aircraft, one after another, stitched like beadwork into the ribs. Parker inverted, then righted. Collins steady. O'Hara grinned with his mouth and not his eyes. The glimpses were neither comfort nor torment. They were acknowledgments. He turned his head and saw, on the left-hand sill of the cockpit, a second line appearing, writing itself in courteous strokes. He watched without breathing, because he did not want to jostle a word in the womb. Do not confuse solitude with separation. Copy, he said, and the word meant amen. The radio offered a single syllable, not in his voice or any Navy man's, in a tone that carried the weight of a stamp on a form. Filed. He should have been terrified. He was in waves, but fear had been dethroned. Something larger had moved into the chair. He knew it by its symptoms. Attention sharpened to a point fine enough to thread a needle in a moving truck. A brief refusal to resent the machine. A loyalty that had nothing to do with flags. You said speaking changes the shape of the room, he told the recorder softly. Do you want to be quiet? We want you to say exactly enough. What is exactly enough? A pause. The engine's rumor deepened like a man settling into his seat. Say the message so that the room can hear itself. He thought of radios at sea, of a watchstander relaying position reports just to feel the chain, of the way men repeated headings in a cockpit, so the aircraft could learn the language of its own survival. He pressed the mic and kept his voice low and square. Flight 19, he said into a net that might have been only him in a room. You are not alone. Nothing came back. Then 4 soft clicks, staggered, in a rhythm he recognized as a roll call of his squadron. Taylor, Collins, O'Hara, Parker. The order was wrong and absolutely correct. He let himself smile. The room brightened the way a chapel brightens when a candle is lit in the corner. The recorder breathed. Sent. He blinked. What? The message has been sent. To whom? To what you call ahead and what you call behind. To the panes where your companions move. To the tower that will write forms about your absence. To the woman who will set down a plate on a table and not fill a fifth chair. To a boy not yet born who will stand by a fence and look up and feel, without a word for it, that the sky is not a ceiling but a conversation. His throat closed like a fist. It hurt to swallow. That's beyond my clearance, sir. Clearance is a game you played, so you would be ready to learn trust. He laughed through his nose, a sound like a man looking away from a compliment. You sound like Instructor Gray when she was in a kind mood. We have listened to your memory. He could not help it. He touched the logbook again, like a man touching a letter he has already memorized just to feel its edge. The writing was still there. It hadn't sunk into metaphor. It lay on the paper with the patience of something that could wait in a drawer for decades without becoming less true. Do I copy more? He asked. Do I relay more? You will carry more, when carrying more no longer breaks you. He breathed. The beam ahead flared, then steadied. The panel's foreign numerals shifted a notch as if a mile had been admitted into their company. He tested a theory. He closed his eyes and shaped the sentence not with breath, but with attention, letting it occur in his skull the way a hymn occurs in a church when no one sings. You are not alone. The corridor pulsed once, smallest possible increment, like the thinnest smile on a face trained to remain at attention. He opened his eyes and tried not to grin back at a room. Entry 15, he told the recorder, because he was not yet ready to let go of numbering. Panel reconfigured. Symbols unfamiliar, but intelligible by temperament. Recorder responsive as interlocutor. Logbook displays luminous text. You are not alone. I relayed to the net. The recorder supplied the verb again, patient and pleased. Sent. Right, he said, accepting the correction. Sent. He realized, with a start that made his fingers tighten on the yoke, that the sentence might not have begun here. It might be a thing the world says to itself whenever a circuit closes without smoke. He had been allowed to be its wire and its mouth, only for a minute. He could not decide whether to be proud or ashamed. He settled, because he was a practical man after all, ungrateful. Outside, another message wrote itself in the air, not in words but in arrangement. The ribs of lattice formed a loop, a figure eight. No, an infinity symbol, but slanted the way a mathematician draws it casually with a pen. It hung there long enough for him to notice, then dissolved into the running architecture. He wondered if Collins saw dunes or Parker saw waves in the same place. He wondered if O'Hara, who had grinned whenever the world could be made to look like a card trick, was being given exactly the sleight of hand he needed to understand. Am I supposed to bring this back? He asked, before shame could stop him. The message, the map, the proof. You will bring back what survives being carried. That's not an answer. It is the only answer that will still be true when your boots touch a floor again. He did not ask which floor. Some questions cheapen a blessing. The panel dimmed to a softer glow, as if the room had put its hand on his shoulder and urged him to look outside. He did. The corridor had changed without moving. The beam no longer felt like an order. It felt like a road he had chosen. He thought of men in rooms in Florida with pencils and maps. He thought of 5-line entry in a station log. Flight 19 departed. Weather clear. He thought of the blank box at the end of every form that a sober man must learn to check without hatred. No further incident. He thought of his mother burying recipes in coffee tins when the weather turned, because that was how you kept good things from going missing. Without intending to, he said aloud to no one, I can carry this. The recorder did not congratulate him. It did something kinder. It stayed quiet. The logbook took advantage of that silence to set one more line in gentle frost under the first. Say it when asked. Say it when not asked. He laughed, the brother of a sob. Yes, sir. Outside, the lattice returned to its patient hum. The panel's alien numerals twitched. Fuel remained a number that didn't panic him. The stopwatch, it must be said, continued to sulk and perform in equal measure. It ticked 5 times and rested like a dog that had discovered the meaning of stay. Leader, Harland said into the net, because love requires repetition. Message received and sent. 2 clicks, soft as a benediction. The corridor leaned forward by a degree too subtle to measure and invited him to continue. He adjusted his grip. Not because the airplane demanded it, but because posture is how a man tells himself what he believes. "You are not alone," he said one last time in the small, honest voice that belongs to kitchens and hangars and decks at night. The room agreed, and together they went on. The cockpit no longer felt like steel and rivets. It felt like parchment stretched too thin, ink bleeding through. Harland pulled the yoke and met resistance, not from hydraulics, but from intention. The jet was not obeying. It was choosing. He glanced at the altimeter. His gut dropped. The needle no longer swept across numbers. Instead, the dial bloomed with glyphs that shimmered like phosphorescent ink, shapes that implied altitude without ever giving him feet or meters, triangles nested inside one another, circles banded like Saturn's rings. And the thin black pointer moved with slow grace, stopping in places that made no human sense. The airspeed indicator had fared no better. The numbers bled away. Where Mach 0.6 and 0.7 once marked his climb, there now stretched a line of symbols, glowing faintly blue. His brain wanted to read them as speeds. But something deeper, reptile and uninvited, insisted they were instructions. The stopwatch sat above it all, still clamped in its cradle, frozen. The red second hand hung halfway between marks. Half a second, eternally held. Harland tore his gaze away. He pressed his hand against the yoke again, harder. He felt it shift, the lines crawling across the console, thin blue-white veins, tighten around the metal like roots embracing stone. They flexed when he pushed, then pulled back, steering with deliberate care. "Not mine," he whispered, more to the recorder than to himself. "It isn't mine anymore." The kneeboard thickened again. Pages, whisper-thin, curled upward as though swelling from hidden ink. He didn't dare look but couldn't resist. At the top of the first new sheet, forbidden notes. He squinted, heart hammering. Below the heading were descriptions in his own block lettering, crisp as military records. Executed roll yaw split, 143 degrees off vector. Subject's hands disengaged. Aircraft performed. He scanned down. Executed temporal stall. Stopwatch aligned. Subject aware. His chest burned. These weren't intentions. They weren't forecasts. They were records of things happening now, as though the act of writing preceded the act of flying. "No," Harland muttered, pencil trembling in his hand. "I didn't do that. You're lying. I didn't." The Avenger lurched, rolled sharply left, then corrected itself with inhuman smoothness. His body whipped against the straps, his breath torn from him. When the G-force eased, the sheet below his fist bore fresh words. Executed correction maneuver. Subject denied responsibility. Archive accepts action. The radio crackled, the voice low and infinite. Recorded. Archived. Sufficient. "No," Harland barked. Spittle on his mask. "Not sufficient. I didn't do it." The reply came, split into two registers, like twin lecturers contradicting yet agreeing. Agency irrelevant. Act archived. He grabbed the stopwatch, clutching it so hard the ridge crown cut into his palm. The frozen hand still glimmered half a second past the mark. Then, impossibly, he felt it vibrate. Not tick, not sweep. Vibrate. Like a living heart thrumming against the skin. And when it did, the entire cockpit paused. The hum of airflow outside dulled. The panels dimmed to stillness. The pencil mid-roll on the kneeboard hung in the air. Time itself seemed to wait for him. He gasped, tears hot at the corners of his eyes. His grip loosened, and the stopwatch went still. The cockpit resumed, pencil clattering, panels flickering back to light. The forbidden notes below him updated with merciless clarity. Subject achieved temporal influence. Duration, 1.4 seconds. Archive confirms potential. Harland's breath came ragged. He whispered to the recorder, "It's not recording me. It's writing me." The lines along the canopy pulsed brighter, crawling inward like frost over glass. Geometry bloomed inside the cockpit itself, angles forming that had no place in Euclidean space. His eyes watered trying to follow them. The yoke, still laced with luminous filaments, flexed again. He held it tightly. But when it moved forward, his muscles followed, not by choice but compulsion. His arms obeyed something deeper than orders. Every correction he resisted appeared instantly in the notes. Subject resists. Resistance archived. Subject complies. Compliance archived. There was no escape. Everything counted. Every rebellion increased the dossier. Every compliance strengthened the lattice. "Who are you?" he begged, though his voice cracked, his throat raw. "What do you want from me?" The radio whispered in syllables that bent inside themselves. He thought he heard conductor. Then he thought he heard recorder. Then he thought he heard you. The stopwatch pulsed again in his hand. He dared squeeze, dared test, and again the cockpit froze. The second hand, crimson and sharp, trembled like it might advance, but didn't. The dossier drank the act immediately. Subject acknowledges responsibility. Archive prepares. Harland slammed his fist into the kneeboard. The pages fluttered, but none tore. They only reshuffled, presenting new entries like a magician's cruel trick. Subject seeks destruction of archive. Archive indestructible. Test passed. He wanted to scream, to tear his headset free, to throw the stopwatch into the void outside. But his hand clung to it. Some part of him already knew it was no longer his to discard. "God forgive me," he whispered. The recorder hissed, then spoke, not in echoes, but in a unified, unyielding voice. Forgiveness irrelevant. Alignment necessary. And then the kneeboard's final entry for the moment appeared. Subject accepts role as instrument. Archive continues. Harland's tears blurred the glowing script. He didn't know whether he had surrendered, or whether surrender itself had been pre-written into the forbidden notes. The stopwatch pulsed one more time, steady and alive, and he realized with horror and awe that his fear had ebbed, not because he was brave, but because the archive had taken even that. It began with the smell of rain that wasn't there. Not cockpit rain, the damp iron tang of condensation and oil, but the exact perfume of summer storm rolling across dry rows of corn. Petrichor, dust shocked into life. It arrived before anything in the room changed, a telegram from a weather that did not belong to this air. Harland inhaled and knew. With the unarguable clarity you feel when someone squeezes your shoulder in the dark, that in 3 seconds something would strike the lattice ahead like lightning striking a windmill. He did not decide to move. His hands were already moving. The yoke came half left, nose fraction down, throttle ease a finger width. The motions were precise enough to make an instructor put away his red pencil. Only after the Avenger obeyed did the world produce the reason. A flash, not cloud or metal, but of a rotating rib in the corridor clipping through a plane of geometry. It passed harmlessly where his fuselage had just been. He had avoided an event that had not yet occurred. The kneeboard recorded it without decorum. Pre-avoidance executed. Subject anticipates rotation event T, 2.9S. Archive confirms. Harland's mouth went dry. "No," he said, to the habit bravado as much as to the room. "No magic. Just luck." The radio hummed away a patient clears his throat. Correlation is not luck. He squeezed the stopwatch. He did not mean to. His hand, hungry for the lever that made sense, closed and held. The red second hand trembled in its half-step. The cockpit sound thinned, then waited. In the waiting, Harland heard other rooms. The memory of the hangar's clatter, the cough of a truck on a December morning, the mutter of men in a briefing who will never say later what they were really thinking. He released. Time resumed with a relieved sigh. The forbidden notes updated. Line appearing underlined with serene cruelty of minutes in a ledger. Subject exercises temporal hold T equals 1.1S. Intent, verification, not escape. Alignment strengthened. He dragged air into his lungs. "Stop writing me like that. The writing will remain if you remain." There was no threat in the voice. There didn't need to be. He looked outside because inside had grown treacherous. The corridor had adopted a new correspondence. No longer honeycomb, no longer ribs and arches, but planes at beautiful, ruthless angles, like the inside of crystal that had been taught the manual of arms. On each plane, quick as fish, shapes sprinted and were gone, an outline of a torpedo bomber, then a contrail he had only ever seen in newspapers, and God help him, a ship's gray deck seen from the low height of a man standing in weather gear, looking up exactly where Harland was. He flinched. The deck vanished. The lattice cleared its throat again. Do not recoil from correspondence. I don't know what that means. It means the room is showing you versions of yourself that you can hold without breaking. He barked a laugh. I am not a room full of versions. I am a man in an airplane that won't listen. Not entirely true, the recorder said, and the sentence landed with the softness of a hand placed palm down where you had hidden a knife. You are a man being taught to hear first. He tried to resent the tenderness. He failed. The next warning came not as scent, but as temperature, a brief coolness on the right side of his face, as if a door had opened on a winter alley. Right roll in two, his bones said. The yoke was already centering. 2 heartbeats later the corridor bucked right. The Avenger flowed with it, pilot and aircraft turning the same pivot, like a couple that has learned to count. The kneeboard, pre-compensation executed T-1.8S, subject and vehicle coherence, rising. Vehicle, he repeated, because the word made him think of tractors and wagons and his father's hands on a stubborn wheel. A thing built to carry, not to conquer. Coherence, he repeated, because the word made his teeth ache and his eyes go soft. He felt strong and very tired. The mixed pilots sometimes call clear. Entry 17, he told the recorder, not to keep score but to remain a person. Predictive sensation preceding lattice events by up to 3 seconds. Stopwatch modulation confirmed control over short holds. Notes record actions before I take them, or while. The recorder amended gently. You are beginning to act where the paper is. He stared at the page. The graphite on it glimmered faintly, as if backlit by an honest moon. He wondered if the page saw him. He wondered when the wondering itself would show up on the next line with a label. Something shifted in the seat of him, under the muscles, under the habit of obedience. An arrangement of loyalties that had always been simple. Orders, aircraft, crew, return, made room for a new loyalty to the timing that kept the corridor from bending him wrong. It felt like learning a second language on the fly, and realizing halfway through your sentence that your mouth had already lowered the right vowels. Leader, he said into the net, the way a man says amen without knowing who stand behind the altar. I can see ahead by a little. I can keep us out of the worst of it. He didn't add if there's an U.S. Some sentences are mercies. 2 clicks. They landed so squarely in his ear that he nodded, then hated himself for being grateful to an imitation. If it was an imitation, the hatred lasted exactly the length of a blink. The corridor angled down. The beam thickened, as if the road had widened where the ditch grew treacherous. Harland's left calf tightened against the rudder pedal before his eyes told him why. When a cross-current tried to carry the nose, his foot was there, steady, disrespectful, the illusion that this was chaos. It wasn't. It was instruction. Talk to me, he said to the recorder. Name it so it stops being a haunt. You are being given prior notice. From you. From you. A pause. Then, reluctant as a teacher giving a student a better grade than policy allows, through us, his hand stilled. He thought he might be shaking. He wasn't. The shaking had moved out of him and into the world where it belonged. He risked something bolder. He pinched the stopwatch just hard enough to feel its pulse without freezing the room. He thought, not said, left wing tip clearance 1 foot, the way you think of a door frame when you carry a long plank through a house. The corridor obliged. A bright rib slid past his left wing by a margin that would have made Chief Alvarez whistle low between his teeth. The good whistle. Harland laughed, unhandsome and pure. The forbidden notes applauded with bureaucratic efficiency. Clearance held within subjects declared tolerance. Archive registers emerging control language. Language, he said, chewing it gently. That's what the stopwatch is. An alphabet with 1 letter that moves. The recorder said, unexpectedly beautiful. The flash of a man's face caught him on the right. O'Hara again, framed by a pane like a photograph in a wallet. This time the grin was gone. The mouth formed a shape Harland knew because he had said it for him so many times across hangars and chow lines. Steady. He nodded to the pane like an idiot and did as he was told. The pain did not disappear. It rode alongside for 3 breaths, then relinquished him like a friend who knows when the next intersection is yours. The smell of rain came back with the exact cruelty of memory. He did not flinch. He counted. 3, 2, a twang in the lattice, 1, and the beam thickened. He wondered distantly if Collins was somewhere counting dunes, if Parker had invented a surf in that place where men make meaning out of white noise. "You are teaching all of us," he said to the room, ashamed of the pleading note he heard in the sentence. "We are teaching what you can already do and have not been permitted to name." "Who forbade it?" he asked. It came out sharper than he intended. He had meant the question for a priest. He had asked it like a prosecutor. "The games you play so you can practice trust," the voice said without malice. He thought of the chain of command, of the shell of the man around a boy who learned early not to cry where it would be written down. He let the indictment go because he wanted to keep flying more than he wanted to be right. The beam bent up. The yoke rose under his palms like the lid of a piano. He did not fight it. He assisted it. The way you help someone older to stand without wounding their pride. "Entry 17-2, he murmured. "Subject." He grimaced and made himself say, I am feeling the changes a little before they arrive. Not precognition. A pressure change in the room. A sentence forming itself at the edge of hearing. The recorder did nothing. It had learned when silence was a higher accuracy. The stopwatch pulsed again, and he knew, with the clarity that war once gave him on dawn patrols over plain water, that if he froze the room now, he could choose an alignment he would live with. He knew 3 alignments. He didn't know how he knew that there were 3, and he knew the middle one carried him closest to the pane where the 2 clicks lived. "Leader," he said softly into the mask, "I'm taking the center." The lattice agreed like a well-run deck. No cheer, no dissent, only competent hands doing the right thing quickly. The corridor became cooler by a whisper. The altimeter's alien digits stepped 1 notch. The air in the cockpit smoothed the small hairs along his forearms and let them lie down. "Harland," said a voice in his ears. Not Taylor. Not the recorder. Not the room. It pronounced his name like a man reading it off a roster at morning muster for the 1,000th time, affectionate by sheer repetition. "Yes," he said, "because the answer to your name is always yes." "Hold." He held. The rib that would have clipped his left wing slid by on the right. He laughed again. Not at the trick, but at the decency of being allowed to learn the trick with the cards face up. The forbidden notes added an entry that made him grip the yoke until his knuckles ached. Subject designated. Conductor provisional. "No," he said, the word breaking wrong in his throat. "Not that. I'm a pilot. A conductor is a pilot who has learned the other currents." He tasted bile and refused to be insulted by a definition that might have saved his life 3 turns ago. "Provisional," he said, seizing on the mercy in the last word. "That means you can take it back. That means you can refuse it." He stared at the stopwatch. He pictured dropping it. He pictured the seconds running like rats. He pictured Chief Alvarez's whistle. He pictured his mother salting stew because she was afraid the meat would turn. He closed his fingers around the little crown and felt the pulse answer him like a friend squeezing back. "I'm not refusing," he said, and it felt like telling the truth to someone who cannot punish you for it. "Agreement sustains you," the other voice said, the one that had first spoken those words like the liturgy of this place. He expected the room to brighten. It didn't. Instead, it rested. He understood that even rooms need to let their shoulders down when a fight ends without a loser. He flew, not for long, or maybe for years. The stopwatch gave him the seconds he needed to keep the worst angles from becoming injuries. The beam gave him the road. The lattice gave him the page. The kneeboard gave him the humiliations that keep a man from telling lies about the past. The radio gave him click-click. And once, God is kind sometimes, a whispered, grainy good that sounded so much like Taylor saying behind a coffee cup that he had to bite the inside of his cheek until he tasted pennies. When the next smell came, a clean hospital smell, alcohol, and laundered cotton, he knew there would be a strip of corridor as gentle as a hallway at night. He loosened his grip and let the Avenger ease through. The forbidden notes did not insult him with praise. They wrote, "Gentle passage held." He loved the economy. He found his voice again at the end of that soft stretch. "If I am altered," he said into the recorder, "it is not that you have put something in me. It is that you have convinced me to stop subtracting." The recorder returned nothing. The logbook wrote a single line in frost that made him laugh with the dignity of a man in on his own joke. "Do not mistrust the part you got right. Roger," he said, "and mend it." Ahead, the corridor showed him a small, dark narrowing, not hostile, simply serious. He knew the shape. It was the throat of a horn where a river decided to be a cataract. He set his feet. He let the stopwatch rest. He let the room speak first. "Leader," he said on the net, "because prayer is often just an address. On your wing." 2 clicks. He went in as the altered man he had not petitioned to be, carrying both the old order and the new one in hands that were not shaking. The motel room should not have been possible. Harland blinked, certain he was still in the cockpit. The hiss of air, the vibration through his bones, gone. In its place, the faint odor of bleach, a humming air conditioner that didn't belong to Alaska, the drab wallpaper pattern of a roadside room. The Avenger's canopy had melted into curtains. The instrument panel had become a bedside lamp with a crooked shade. He sat on the edge of the bed, boots heavy against carpet, helmet still in his hands. The transition had been seamless, as though the lattice had folded the cockpit inside out and left him here mid-thought. On the nightstand lay a manila envelope. Plain, familiar, wrong. Stamped in block red ink across its front. Subject in resonance. His throat closed. He touched the folder. Cold. The paper itself seemed to shiver. He slid it open. Inside, the first page bore his name in typewritten black. Harland James. Beneath it, columns. Height, weight, eye color. Then, response latency reduced. Predictive correspondence increasing. Subject alignment probable. He turned another page. His flight record. Missions he'd flown, interlaced with annotations of things he had never admitted. Moments of doubt in formation, memories of holding back from reporting what he saw. Each margin bore the faint glow of handwriting, his handwriting, as if the dossier were writing itself while he read. Subject's protest diminishing. Subject exhibits tenderness toward correspondence. Subject not resisting name. Conductor. Harland shoved the envelope away. It slid back toward him, as if gravity had tilted the room. The lamp flickered. His cassette recorder sat on the desk, reels turning though no tape was inside. The recorder spoke, voice layered with his own, and something else. Review acknowledges. Dossier 2 continues. He shouted, "I never agreed to this. I never signed anything." The walls of the room vibrated faintly, seams glowing as if geometry pressed just behind them. Signature unnecessary. Resonance sufficient. His hand shook. He reached for the phone on the nightstand, desperate for any sound that belonged to Earth. The receiver was cold plastic, but when he pressed it to his ear, he heard only his own voice, older, weary, speaking from a future he hadn't lived. "You already know how this ends." He hurled the phone against the wall. It didn't shatter. It dissolved into light, then reformed neatly on the stand, receiver in place. The dossier pages rustled though no air moved. The top line reinked itself, subject attempting denial. Archive strengthened by refusal. Harland sank back onto the bed. Sweat soaked his undershirt. His fists clenched and unclenched as if trying to remember the yoke's weight. "Why me?" he rasped. The recorder stopped. For the first time, the silence felt deliberate. Then, because efficiency required a vessel, the words etched themselves onto the dossier's last page, glowing with quiet inevitability. Harland pressed his palms over his face. The motel room's corners bent in and out, geometry leaking like water under a door. He wanted to scream, to beg, to demand, but all that came out was a whisper. "I'm not yours." The recorder answered, steady as law. "Not yours, either." The motel peeled away like a decal in warm water. Carpet flattened to runway. Wallpaper tessellated into ribs of light. The lamp shade unrolled into a horizon arc. Harland felt no lurch. He simply discovered himself already buckled back into the cockpit, hands where he had left them, stopwatch warm as a pulse against his palm. The corridor received him with the soft authority of a well-rehearsed cue. He checked his kneeboard. The top sheet bore a heading that had not been there before. Missing miles. Beneath it, neat columns. Plan distance, log distance, experience distance, archive distance. The first two agreed like good soldiers. The third was blank. The fourth was not a number, but a symbol that resembled a figure eight bent along a third axis, the kind of sign a mathematician might draw only after deciding forgive the world for being three-dimensional. Experience distance, he said, to make the blank a little less bold. I was there for it. The recorder, no longer just a machine, but the habit of the room speaking through it. Answer with patient courtesy. You were carried. Like current, he said. Like current. The corridor brightened by a hair. The way a teacher nods when the student uses the right word with his own mouth. He looked up and almost forgot to breathe. The passage widened into a vault the size of weather. Not sky, sky forgives. This place did not. It demanded, and in demanding revealed. Suspended from the ribs of lattice-hung machines. Not engines, not aircraft, not ships, but assemblies that borrowed gestures from all three. Cylinders a length of streets rotated inside cages of prismatic struts. Catenary arcs hung between pillars of light. Their curves solving equations he could feel in the small bones of his ears. At each intersection, nodes pulsed, on, off, on, with the steady moral certainty of lighthouse clocks. Miles he had not flown, and would swear under oath to have flown lay coiled here, not as roads, but as instruments, spooled path, braided headings, harmonized vectors. The distance had not vanished. It had been harvested and hung up to dry. His throat tightened. How many miles did you take? We do not take. We keep from being wasted. On whose authority? A pause, almost kind. On yours, when you become capable of granting it. He wanted to argue. He found he preferred to look. The nearest machine resembled a drum with windows. Inside, a loop of light ran endlessly, a bead of brightness making circuits without hurry. His hand rose without instruction. The stopwatch trembled in sympathy. Its frozen half-second felt suddenly like a vowel from the other machine's language. He half-pressed the crown. The loop slowed, not because he commanded it, but because it had graciously chosen to show him what obedience looked like from its side. The kneeboard wrote on itself, graphite shining. Subject enters vault to conserve vectors. Recognition present. Hostility absent. Pedagogy initiated. He swallowed. Pedagogy. Teaching, when both sides refuse humiliation. Both, he said, and the word lifted shame from his shoulders like a flight jacket removed by a friend. He leaned the Avenger to port. The wing cut a wedge through dustless light. The missing miles hummed around him, each machine sounding a different assurance. Here a deep organ tone like a foghorn in slow motion. There a high wire whine, the sound of tension behaving. Between them, a chorus of clicks like semaphore you could hear. The vault was not a factory. It was a conservatory. The devices were not engines but instruments, and the room was tuning itself on the memory of his route. How far have I flown? He asked. Planned, 148 nautical miles. Logged, 139. Experienced, 32. Conserved, the remainder. The number hit like cold wash water. 32. Your bones agree, the voice said gently. You feel 32. The rest was carried for you so that you could spend attention. That's stealing, he said, but without heat. His mother had once taken the heaviest bucket from his 10-year-old hands and poured half into her own, and he called it stealing then too, with a boy's wounded honor. We can return them. The sentence was so simple it embarrassed him. What happens if you do? You fall behind where you can be heard. He looked at the vault again. The machines pulsed not toward him but with him, as if his heart had joined the metronome. He tried to imagine those miles jammed back into his life like ungraded papers on a desk. He pictured fatigue's gravity, panic syrup, the old noise rising to drown the thin new music he had only just learned to hum. Keep them, he said, surprised to hear the decency in his own voice. Hold them for me, or for others. For the others we are holding, the room agreed, and out beyond the next bay a corridor flickered with the familiar silhouettes of Parker inverted, Collins level, O'Hara grinning despite terror. The pains were closer here, as if the vault were a place where distances negotiated in good faith. He put a palm flat on the panel, the way a man greets a horse that has chosen not to kick him. What do I owe you for this? You owe us miles you can spare later, when you can make them without cost. He laughed, a cracked, grateful sound. Installment plan. Reciprocity. The recorder said, pleased with the accuracy. He took inventory, because discipline is the country he knows. Fuel. Stable, in the sense that the numbers had decided be kind rather than literal. Temperatures. Steady. Vibration, present but civilized. Fear, present but leashed. Wonder, not a parameter he had ever checked before, but measurable now as the way his jaw relaxed without permission. He banked through a colonnade of frames that reconfigured themselves exactly the amount required to admit him. Each time, the stopwatch ticked, not forward, not back, relevance. It was like discovering a new instrument in a cockpit you had flown for years, and realizing your hand had always known where it was. The kneeboard recorded with bureaucratic fairness. Subject demonstrates economy. Expenditure of seconds only where effect exceeds cost. Archive credits, plus 17. Credits, he repeated, amused and offended by the term's accounts payable smell. You keep score? We keep promise. The distinction felt like a hand on his shoulder. He felt the warning arrive in the room, not as scent or temperature this time, but as a blankness, the way a dog's ears lift when silence stops being polite. Ahead, a long truss of lattice extended like a bridge he had not consented to cross. He relaxed his fingers and let the yoke rest under them the way a surgeon rests a scalpel on a tray between incisions. What is it? He asked. Overdrawn distance. The recorder answered. A place where you were going to spend what you did not have. And now, we will cover it if you permit. He thought of the log at Fort Lauderdale, of men drawing neat lines down columns. Fuel consumed, distance flown, incident none. He thought of the new column in his kneeboard. Experienced distance. He wanted it not to be blank anymore, but he wanted more not to be a liar. Cover it, he said, but charge me later when I can pay. The bridge brightened and thinned, like a promise becoming breathable air. The Avenger glided through. Something in his shoulders unclenched that he had not known was braced. The stopwatch gave one satisfied thrum. A machine to starboard, drum window, loop accelerated slightly, as if making change. The vault deepened into a nave. In the high reaches, other assemblies hung. Spirals that traced logarithms with visible gentleness. Plates that shifted like shoals making way for a keel. Frames arranged in ratios that made the inside of his teeth ache pleasantly. He understood that this, too, was distance. Not miles, but fit, the measured space between things that must not grind. He had been hauling his life through narrow gaps for years. Here, the gaps had learned his measurements. He said it because he had to. Thank you. The room refused humility. You are the one who moved your hands when asked. He blinked hard. He looked away. He looked back because looking away had felt like cheating. Entry 19, he told the recorder. Vault of conserved vectors encountered. Missing miles stored as instruments. Reciprocity offered. Distance covered ahead in exchange for distance offered later, when solvency improves. He snorted softly. My auditors will hate this report. They will not be asked for it. Someone will, he said. There are always forms. The logbook agreed with a frost-thin line. Say it plain. Beneath, as if a clerk had felt moved to add human context to a ledger entry. We held for him what he could not carry and asked him to sing when he could. Sing, he repeated, and found the word not intolerable. The vault tapered. The machines thinned. The corridor's ribs returned, but they were wider set now, as if trusting him not to think of walls every time he saw a line. Far ahead, a softness spread, the way water looks shallow when it is in fact perfectly deep. He recognized it as a place he could rest if he were not careful, a place in which a man might sleep and mistake sleeping for safety. He touched the stopwatch lightly and felt it answer with a mild disapproval that made him grin. Not now, he told it. Later. The recorder said nothing. The kneeboard wrote a single, almost affectionate entry. Subject resists the kindly trap. Archive notes discretion. He thought of Collins, Parker, O'Hara sweeping to their own bays of the vault, each shown missing miles in a shape he could love. He thought of Taylor's 2-click benedictions. The way command sometimes is a yes you never hear. He thought of the tower, of the wife who would set plates, of the boy at the fence. These names the room had dared to say aloud for him when he could not. How far to the next throat? He asked, using the word his body had given to narrows and cataracts and sounds that thin. Exactly as far as he could be sure without lying. The recorder answered, and he barked a laugh, because that was, finally, a unit he could use. He checked his hands. They were steady. He checked his eyes. They were wet. He checked his mouth. It had learned how not to sneer at help. He checked the stopwatch. It was no longer frozen at a half-second. The hand hovered a hair above the mark, free to move or not, and he understood he would never again mistake stillness for failure. The corridor narrowed, not unkind. The vault fell behind, machines dimming like lights left on in rooms you can trust. The missing miles stayed where they were useful. He carried 32 and found that 32, arranged honestly, weighed less than lies arranged beautifully. Leader, he set into the net for the sake of tradition, and hope, be advised, there's a conservatory up ahead. If you get a chance, it owes you a song. 2 clicks. A third, faint and late, as if sent from a pain slightly out of phase. He smiled and did not count which was which. He tightened his harness. He squared the yoke to the beam. He let the stopwatch rest with the patience of a man who has learned another alphabet and does not need to show off by spelling. Experienced distance, he said, and the blank on the page filled itself with a number that changed nothing and meant everything. Enough to go on. He went on. The first sign was not noise but weight. The corridor leaned against him the way a crowd leans when it panics. Pressure without direction. The Avenger's frame groaned. Rivets held, then complained. The yoke stiffened under his palms, as if welded. Harland pulled and felt not opposition, but intention. Then the sound came, deep, not thunder, but machinery choosing to vibrate in a key that human bones dislike. It rattled the airframe like dice in a closed fist. The stopwatch in its mount glowed. Not a steady light, but a rising heat. The way steel begins to color under forge flame. Harland snatched it into his hand, yelped. The metal did not burn skin, but something beneath it reached his nerves, a radiance that declared, this second costs. He squeezed it anyway. The cockpit lurched into half-stillness, walls trembling but caught in amber. The second hand quivered like a cornered animal. Harland's breath fogged the canopy and hung there. His heart felt as though it had borrowed another rhythm, one foreign and merciless. The kneeboard accepted the moment without sympathy. Subject resists lattice correction. Temporal hold activated. Duration accrues against subject. Against, he spat. What ledger do you think you're keeping? The recorder answered with calm cruelty. The only ledger, endurance. Time released. The aircraft plunged into vibration. Gauges jumped like spooked horses. Altitude spun into symbols and back. The artificial horizon fractured into shards of light that refused to agree on which way was up. Harland fought the yoke. His shoulders screamed. His wrists felt threaded with wire. But every ounce of muscle was answered by the corridor's refusal, as if he were wrestling the intent of the vault itself. Not yours, he grunted through teeth. Not your ship. Mine. The forbidden note scrawled a retort across the kneeboard in crisp lines. Subject insists on authorship. Archive notes error. Vehicle and pilot inseparable. Contest unnecessary. He roared back anyway, yanking the yoke until his harness cut into ribs. The Avenger slewed, wings shuddering. The stopwatch flared, so bright he thought it would melt into his palm. Then the impossible. The radio spoke with his voice, a recording of him from minutes ago, spliced and reassembled. Entry 20. Subject demonstrates resistance, but endurance collapses. His throat constricted. He hadn't said it, but he heard himself say it. Get out of my mouth, he rasped. Mouth irrelevant. Archive requires testimony. Efficiency achieved by direct use. The vibration rose higher, past metal into marrow. His teeth ached. The panel's rivets drummed like 1,000 fists. Harland tried the stopwatch again. He pressed until his knuckles blanched, until his nerves howled, until the red hand trembled against the mark. The cockpit hushed for one heartbeat. 2. His vision narrowed. The kneeboard wasted no time. Subject belongs hold beyond tolerance. Cost exceeds reserve. He felt it then, the ledger collecting not miles but him. Each hold shaved something invisible, like coins taken from a pocket he hadn't known was finite. The corridor pulsed, light collapsing inward like lungs refusing air. For a moment he saw the missing miles he had been shown earlier, now pressed forward like creditors demanding repayment. He croaked through clenched teeth. "You want me to break?" The recorder corrected, with the patience of law. "We want to know if you bend without dishonor." The stopwatch blazed hotter. His palm stung. He smelled his own skin, not charred, but ionized, like copper wire sparking under rain. His hands shook, not with fear, but because the heat had numbed sensation into white. He held anyway. For one breath, for two, until every muscle quivered. Then he let go. Time slammed back. The Avenger jolted, but did not tumble. The beam steadied. The vibration fell to a tolerable growl. His lungs dragged in air like a diver breaking surface. He dared glance at his palms. No burns. But the skin glowed faintly, lines etched in pale fire where flesh met metal. Marks not drawn but inscribed, as if the stopwatch had decided to autograph him. The kneeboard recorded without drama. Subject resists. Subject survives. Archive notes new correspondence. Manual signature required. He sagged against the straps, trembling, throat raw. "Entry 20, he rasped, trying to beat the recorder to the line. Resistance phase initiated. Stopwatch too hot to hold. Hand marked. Not injury. Inscription. The cassette reel spun. This time they did not echo him. They added, "Inscription equals acceptance of cost. Subject qualified for further endurance." He shook his head weakly. "Don't you dare promote me." The corridor dimmed, as if amused. He stared at his glowing hands. Fingers trembling, veins outlined in faint geometry. For the first time since entering, Harland understood that survival might not mean return. It might mean becoming the ledger's handwriting. His voice cracked. "I'm not done being me." The recorder's reply was soft as a verdict. Then resist again. And ahead, the corridor narrowed, waiting. The world returned with an ordinary click. Not the judder of a landing, not the triumphant screech of tires. A click, like a light switch in a hallway, like a door latch in winter. The corridor's ribs thinned, and when Harland blinked, he stood with both hands on a narrow steel sill, looking through a pane of glass that smelled faintly of ammonia and warm dust. Below him, a runway ran the length of a morning that should not have existed. He knew the geometry of those markings, the white center line, the staccato of dashes answering a nose wheel. Beyond the ocean, the plain, honest Atlantic, not folded or lit with lattice, rose into a haze horizon. Wind socks stood out stiffly, pointing at a sky that had remembered clouds. Somewhere a gull laughed like a drunk uncle and refused to apologize. Engines coughed, cleared their throats, then settled into the familiar happy cruelty of turning fuel into certainty. He was in the squadron building. He knew the angle of this window. He had stood at it before, a boy among boys, memorizing how aircraft looked dignified even when taxiing like cattle in a narrow lane. He knew the smell of it, too, mopping coffee and old canvas, paperwork and metal, and the clean ache of oil. He lifted his hand from the sill. The glow remained. The stopwatch had left him written. Pale filigree traced along his palms and into the webbing between thumb and forefinger. Faint blue-white lines like capillaries remembered by winter light. The marks did not flare. They did not fade. They simply were, the way scars refused to argue. Grounded, he said before he meant to, testing the weight of the word aloud. It hung in the air without echo. It did not belong to the corridor's grammar. It belonged to this building, to this pain. A young crewman hustled past in the corridor behind him, boots slapping tile. The kid's reflection reached the glass of fraction before his body did, as if the window ran slightly ahead of time. He didn't look in. Harland made himself smaller out of old habit, the way men do when they are waiting to be told not to be where they are. On the apron, the first aircraft turned on to the active. Not an Avenger, Those belonged to other years, but its lineage was familiar. A body that could be trusted to carry, a wing with the right humility, a cockpit that asked you to be better than you felt. The pilot's helmet flashed in the canopy. The plane paused, as if listening for orders that had already been given, then rolled. Harland put his palm flat to the glass. The geometry in his hand answered with a small, private warmth. Out on the runway, the aircraft's nose dipped with the weight of acceleration, then lifted with that little shake you only get when you're honest about being heavier than air. The main wheels blurred. The aircraft made its choice between ground and sky, and chose correctly. The second aircraft lined up. The third followed close, impatient. A line of them, a litany of competence. He counted them without meaning to and lost count, as if the runway had decided to be generous. The reflection on the window gave him back a man he did not like to name. Tall enough, lean because food was either too much or too little, jaw locked into a confession had not been asked to give. The glow in his palms painted two small ghost lanterns over the reflection's hands. When he tilted his head, the reflected head did not. When he took a breath, the reflected chest rose a heartbeat later. "You first," he told it, embarrassed to be caught talking to glass. It looked steady, steadier than he felt. The office door behind him opened and closed with the same polite click that had brought him here. Paper rustled. A pen settled in a hand that had pushed 1,000 forms across a desk between men and their hopes. He did not turn. He knew the shape of a room that did not want you to have your back to its authority. "Mr. James," said a voice that had been built to be kind within regulation. "Do you know why you're here?" He kept his hand on the pane because the pane did not flinch when confessed to. "Because I can't be there." "I didn't say that," the voice answered. It didn't need a name. It carried the clean burden of duty that men had been someone's captain and someone else's son. I said, "Do you know why?" Harland searched the corridor's grammar and found the squadrons instead. "Because something is using me to write reports the Navy doesn't have forms for." Silence proved he had not disappointed the room's appetite for honesty. Papers shuffled once. "Sit." He stayed standing. Not defiance. A man at a window. That was all. On the runway, number 2 rotated and climbed. Wheels tucked into wells with the discreet elegance of good engineering. Harland watched his own reflection watch it. The reflected man's eyes were ringed with fatigue that did not cheapen them. "We are going to assign you to the ground," the voice said. So careful he almost loved it. Temporarily. The word plucked a string in him that had been tuned to break. He kept his eyes on the taxiway, where number 3 had begun its roll. He stopped, the corridor's verdict catching his tongue like a rough seam. "Sufficient. I am still useful." "To the Navy?" the voice asked. "To whatever made a habit of my hands," he said, hating the poetry and hating that it was true. A breath. Paper moved again. He pictured a signature made with the kind of pen that leaves a trough in the fibers. "We're not denying that something happened to your flight," the voice said, and the careful something was worth more than the sentence pretended. "We are asking you to be here while we learn what to do with that fact." "Grounded," he said again, because a man should say the right noun at least once when it takes his chair. "If that helps you carry it," the voice allowed. He pressed harder on the glass. The lines in his hand brightened, not with threat, but with acknowledgement. The pain cooled under his palm and then warmed, like a dog leaning against your leg. On the ramp below, a crew chief pointed, chinned, watched, the choreography of competence continuing without him. "My hands," Harland said, finally turning. The officer behind the desk sat in half shadow, more chair and ribbon than face. "Sir, with respect, my hands have correspondence." He lifted both palms. The faint lattice there answered with an obedient shimmer. The pen stopped. "Are you in pain?" He laughed once. "Only when I pretend I'm not." A moment passed where neither man wanted the next sentence. The officer broke first. "Do you believe this correspondence will interfere with your ability to execute a flight plan?" "It will interfere with my ability to ignore one," he said, and surprised himself with the ferocity under his calm. "Sir, I can feel the air before it decides to be rough. I can count seconds I haven't spent yet. I can smell rain that isn't on the map. I can keep boys from becoming reports, if someone will let me keep my hands on a yoke. The officer folded one palm over the other, as if praying on behalf of someone who would not. And if I told you that the men who sign my orders do not yet believe a sentence that kind can go into an ops brief, then I'll write it where they can't refuse to read, Harland said, gesturing slightly toward the runway. The Payne took his motion and presented it back to the airfield as a ghost of a signal flag. Ground, the officer repeated, more to his own duty than to Harland. Instruction, observation. If there is correspondence, perhaps we can learn to take dictation. The word instruction cut both ways. He nodded, because nodding is what you owe a man trying to be decent inside the tolerances of policy. I'll teach, he said. He didn't say I'll conduct. He wouldn't yet. The officer's eyes, when they finally came out of shadow, were tired in the correct way. We will assign you an office with a view, he said, with a grace that found the only comfort that mattered, and a radio. 2 clicks, Harland thought, and almost smiled. He turned back to Glass. Number 4 had reached the end of the taxiway. The pilot's gloved hand rested on the throttle, with a touch that might one day wear a nation in it. The nose dipped, the tail spoke, the wheels decided, the wing believed. The simple, extraordinary business of leaving the ground happened exactly as often as men deserved and more often than they earned. His reflection now lagged him by a full breath, a small, haunting courtesy. He raised his marked hand. The reflection raised an unmarked one, then caught up, lattice blooming gently across its palm until the two matched. He had the childish urge to press print to print and see if the glass would swallow him. Instead, he placed both hands flat on the pane, and this time the glow did spread thin, careful threads like frost deciding to become fern. For an instant, faint lines laced outward from his palms across the window. They did not pass through. They stayed as a pattern between him and the runway, a transparent notation over the movement of men and machines. The officer behind him did not gasp. Professionals don't, but a chair leg spoke softly against tile. Harland, the voice said, surrendering his rank for his name for the space of a sentence, do you intend to perform whatever that is in front of my pilots? He let the glow subside until the pane returned to honest glass. Only if it keeps him alive, he said. Otherwise, I will stand still and take notes like a good man. Silence. Then a small admission from behind a desk. It would be easier if you were less good. He smiled without showing teeth. It would be easier if I were less changed. On the runway, number 5 rotated too early, then corrected with panic grace. Chief Alvarez, alive here in a way that required the kindness of belief, would have whistled. Harland felt a twitch in his calves, as if he had been connected to that pilot's shoes by sympathetic wire. He did not move. He did not shout. He let the correction belong to the boy who had made it. He would praise him later in a language the boy could hear. Temporary, the officer said again, as if rubbing a charm. Grounded, Harland watched the sky accept the weight it had been promised. Temporarily, he agreed, and heard the corridor's grammar smuggle itself into the word. He did not try the stopwatch. He did not need to. Time here moved on its own legs. He let it. The officer's pen found paper again. Pages turned. Somewhere down the hall, a typewriter began its brave, clacking fiction. A coffee pot clicked into keeping warm. The world rehearsed competence with an almost obscene decency. Harland, the officer said, back to the safety of rank now, will want your tapes. I'll bring the ones that let you hear what you can carry, he said, surprising them both with a mercy in the line. He stayed until the last of the morning line rolled and lifted and tucked. He kept his palms to the glass until the glow decided it had made its point and stood down. He watched his reflection watch him, the two men learning to arrive at the same breath. When the room finally let him step back, the pane held the faintest geometry where his hands had been, no more than a rumor, the way a field remembers the path a boy wore through it at school. Grounded, he thought, not as sentence, but as instrument. He could conduct from here if he had to. He could be ordinary and necessary, and in being both not lie. The corridor did not come for him. The stopwatch did not tick. The ledger did not add a line. The sky did what skies do, which is put up with men in exchange for their attention. He turned from a window, hands still warm, and face a world that would have to learn new forms or make do with old ones read more kindly. He did not ask permission to be useful. He began arranging chairs. He began drawing lines on paper with a pencil that refused to lie. He began, in other words, to be ground the way a circuit means it, the part that steadies a rest. Behind him, jets went on doing the most human thing machines ever learned to do. Ahead of him, a door with a latch that clicked waited to be opened and closed as many times as it took. He went to work. It began with light in the glass. The squadron window had behaved like glass all morning, dutiful, reflective, honest about distance. Now it brightened, not from sun, not from lamp, but from within its thickness. The faint frost print his hands had left hours ago began to glow again, threads quickening like veins rediscovering blood. Harland froze. He had been moving papers across a desk, marking logs with the stiff humility of a grounded man. Now the geometry beckoned in quiet confidence, as if to say, "We have rehearsed patience. It is time." The stopwatch pulsed in his breast pocket. He had not touched it since the vault. He had almost convinced himself it was only a memento, but the heat seeping through his flight suit told him it had never ceased watching. He lifted his hands. The glow in his palms answered instantly, lines etching themselves brighter until flesh seemed carved from lattice. He pressed them against the glass. The pain no longer resisted. It admitted. The world folded. Not torn, not broken. Folded, like cloth yielding to a practiced hand. The squadron office, the desk, the colonel's cautious kindness, gone into pleats. The air became lattice. The floor became vectors. Harland stood once more inside the corridor. Cockpit around him, yoke beneath his palms, harness tightening as though it had never loosened. The Avenger was not an Avenger anymore. Its panels dissolved, switches melting into runes of geometry. The canopy curved wide into ribs of light, no horizon beyond. He looked down. His arms glowed translucent, bone and blood turned diagrammatic, as if he were being drafted into the corridor's own language. The kneeboard drifted weightless in front of him. Across its surface, the forbidden notes had become a single sentence repeated. Subject sufficient. Subject sufficient. Subject sufficient. The stopwatch burned so hot he thought would brand him. He clenched it anyway. The second hand twitched forward. Not a full tick, just enough to remind him that time was still available if he dared spend it. His reflection appeared in the canopy. Not a neat mirror, but a half-transparent figure sitting across from him, moving almost with him. A conductor, baton poised, except the baton was his own glowing hand. When he turned the yoke, the reflection guided the other way, harmonizing instead of opposing. "Are you me?" Harland whispered. The recorder's voice came from everywhere. "You are sufficient. Therefore you are multiple." His throat tightened. "I can't fly in both directions." "You can. The miles will be stored. The records will be honest." The corridor shifted violently. Angles rippled, opening into interlaced avenues, as though multiple routes had been waiting for him. Ahead, 3 beams diverged, one narrow and harsh, one wide and blinding, one steady and patient. The stopwatch throbbed in his hand, begging for a choice. His palm sweated inside the glow. His voice cracked. "If I choose wrong, there is no wrong, only correspondence." He pressed the crown. The cockpit froze. The stopwatch's red hand leapt forward and stopped, etching 3 positions at once. For a breathless eternity, Harland saw himself divided, one version banking hard left into the narrow throat, teeth gritted, another climbing into the white beam, dissolving fast as snow, a third leveling into the patient road, face calm, hands steady. When the hold ended, all 3 flickered and rejoined, condensed back into the single body of him shivering against the straps. The kneeboard caught the moment like an accountant. Subject distributed. Subject rejoined. Archive confirms integrity. He gasped and pressed his palms to his chest. The lattice lines crawled higher, searing into collarbones, sketching themselves across his ribs. He could feel his lungs expanding inside geometry, breath timed not by muscle but by correspondence. The recorder's voice softened. "You are dissolving into the ledger. This is not death. This is permanence. Harland shook his head violently. I didn't agree to permanence. The stopwatch pulsed again, calmer this time. Agreement is already archived. He wanted to scream, but instead found himself laughing, ragged and terrified. Then at least let me conduct my own ending. The corridor brightened. The canopy dissolved outward until all that remained was light, and Harland himself glowing in its weave, neither erased nor intact, but aligned. The office was clean in the way operating rooms envy. Not a speck of dust on the baseboards, not a fingerprint on the glass front case that displayed flags and commendations, not a shadow where the fluorescent panels could chase it out. The air smelled of ammonia, paper, and the faint sweetness of new plastic. Harland entered like a man stepping onto ice he knows will hold, palms hot in his pockets where the stopwatch lay against his ribs like a coal that refused to dim. The colonel rose halfway and chose not to finish the motion. Authority economized. Two men in gray suits did not rise at all. They watched the way weather watches, without blinking, as if blinking would let a storm slip by. On the desk, squared with draftsman's love for right angles, lay a folder stamped in fat red ink. Medical Review. The words had the heaviness of a stamp striking meat. Mr. James, the colonel said, and the courtesy of Mr. felt like a glove over a hand that had never been cold. Please sit. Harland did not. He remained standing long enough to be rude without being brave, then sat with a pilot's care, spine straight, shoulders unlocked, hands where everyone could see them. The faint lattice in his palms kept its own counsel, lines dim under the office light, as if careful not to show off in front of strangers. The nearer suit opened the folder. The paper inside glowed very slightly, as though the copier had printed with moonlight. He slid a form to the blotter. You understand the nature of this interview. No, Harland said calmly, but I know what you'll call it. The man indulged the smallest of smiles. Fit for duty is one phrase. Disposition another. Special case is the one that keeps recurring. Special, the colonel repeated, tasting the word for bitterness and not spitting it out. The second suit cleared his throat with the solemnity of a judge. We have read your logs. We have listened to your tapes. We have spoken personnel who witnessed phenomena. He did not like the syllables and punished them by saying them cleanly. In the operations building. We are not here to dispute occurrence. That's generous, Harland said, and left it at that. What we are here to establish, the first suit continued, is whether you are medically and psychologically fit to remain in proximity to aircraft and crews, given the correspondence. He flipped a page. The tone didn't change. And whether the correspondents intend harm. Harland rested his forearms on his knees and looked down at his hands. The marks were diagrams now more than scars, thin blue-white traceries that seemed to know the room's geometry better than the men in it. If it intended harm, he said, you'd be filing a different folder. The colonel's mouth made a line. Humor is not a defense. No, sir, Harland said. It's a fuse. It keeps the house from burning down while you figure out where the short is. The suit closest to him slid a graph sheet across the desk. Pulse rate respiration, galvanic response. Another sheet, PTSD checklist. A third, neurological, aberrant somatosensory phenomena. The boxes were so small and the pen so black. The questions began in the clean, responsible order of such interviews. Nightmares. Not since the morning. Hallucinations. Not mine. Voices. Yes. Command hallucinations? A phrase held like a scalpel. Commands, yes, Harland said. Hallucinations, no. He met the man's eyes. There is a difference between hearing things and being addressed. The man did not look away. Do you obey? When I agree. The colonel's pen ticked once against a blotter, like a Geiger, counter-registering background truth. Do you feel compelled by... He frowned at the page, then abandoned it. By any agency other than orders given through proper channels? Harland let the stopwatch press harder into his chest before answering. I feel compelled by the need to keep pilots from becoming paperwork. He exhaled slow. Sometimes the channel that delivers that compulsion is not in your manual. That is not an answer, the colonel said, but his tone lacked its earlier iron. He had flown once. You could hear it when a man's sentences banked correctly. The second suit slid a photograph from the folder. Grainy black and white, fluorescent glare, the reflection of a man in a window. The operations building pane with faint frostiometry, like ferns in winter. Harland's hands were on the glass, glow thin and obedient under institutional light. Explain this, Mr. James. He considered lying, considered covering the truth with a blanket labeled static discharge. He chose not to. I was showing the room how to hold. Hold what? Boys' lives, Harland said, and let the word boys be disrespectful and correct. The men were very quiet. There's a kind of silence that belongs to an office full of uniforms. Disciplined, patriotic, terrified of magic it can't draft. This was that. Fluorescence hummed. The air conditioner breathed. A stapler shone like a small white coffin. The nearer suit recovered. Your palms, he said, and his eyes were clinical, not cruel. May we examine the markings? You may look, Harland said, and turned his hands, palms up, onto the blotter. The lines woke as if glad to be seen. They did not flare. They did not misbehave. They lay there with the modesty of good silver. The suit took a pencil and, careful as a man tracing a child's hand, mapped the lattice. The graphite line chased blue-white. When he lifted the pencil, the diagram he had drawn remained on the paper and continued to glow faintly, as if the paper liked what it had learned. The man swallowed, softly. Remarkable. Repeatable, Harland said. When it matters. Does it hurt? The colonel asked, and the question was human enough that Harland loved him for a second. It burns when I spend what I don't have, Harland said. Otherwise, it's like biting your tongue and deciding not to bleed. The nearer suit closed the folder halfway and rested his palm on it, as if holding down a map in wind. Mr. James, we intend to recommend temporary removal from flight status, continued observation and classification as he inhaled, as a special case, under medical review. Indefinite, Harland said, voice level. That term occurs. The man allowed, and in the honesty of the nod there was no malice. Harland looked past them to the window, not the operations pane with its learned frost. This window was ordinary, and beyond it a rectangle of ordinary daylight sat on the grass like a folded flag. He could not smell rain. He could not hear the corridor. He could only hear his own breath and the fluorescent hum and the scratch of a pen filling a box that would define his portion of the world. Permission to speak plain, he said. The colonel gestured, a small, merciful sweep of fingers. You cannot keep me from the air, Harland said. And because he had chosen simple words, the room had to absorb them. You can keep me from being in the seat. You can keep me from a call sign. You can keep me from a logbook. But you cannot keep me from the air. It learned me. I learned it back. The first suit closed the folder. No one is attempting to keep you from. He searched for a phrase that would not embarrass him. From the profession. I'm not talking about that, Harland said. I'm talking about correspondence. The recorder in his pocket, silent until now, clicked its reels once in a sound so small only men who had learned to hear small sounds could hear it. The colonel leaned back. He had the stare of a man choosing which future he would be able to defend to himself. Mr. James, he said finally, do you intend to follow lawful orders while under observation? Yes, sir, Harland said at once, and some small thread of the room exhaled. And do you intend to withhold whatever faculty this is from men whose lives might depend on it? No, sir, Harland said. I intend to spend it like money and like mercy in that order. The suits looked at one another. The quick glance of men who would have preferred to be wrong together than right alone. One of them reached into his inner pocket and produced an envelope, cream stock, official seal. He slid it across the desk without theater. This is your status pending review. Harland did not touch it. Read it, the colonel said. Harland read. Words he had seen before, in other rooms, next to other names. Indefinite non-flight status, medical observation, restricted access. Beneath, a line with a box unmarked. Return of flight considered upon resolution of anomaly. There is always a box. It is the box a decent man leaves himself to avoid lying. He closed the envelope as if closing a friend's eyes. Understood, he said. The nearer suit softened by a fraction. You will be given an office near the ready room, a radio, access to recordings and radar feeds. You will not instruct without authorization. You will not touch aircraft without clearance. You will, if you are willing, tell us what you feel when you feel it. Harland nodded. You can write it down under medical or operational or chaplain. I don't care what the folder says, as long as somebody listens. The colonel's gaze flicked to the faint geometry waking in Harland's palms. And if we ask you to restrain that, I'll put my hands in my pockets, Harland said, and take them out when a boy is 3 seconds from becoming a letter. Silence again. Not hostile, appalled by its own choices. The second suit gathered the papers, squared them, slid them back into the folder as if tucking a child in. He stood. The other followed. The colonel did not. Harland did not. At the door, the first suit paused. One final question, he said without turning. Do you claim, formally or privately, that you are in contact with an intelligence external to yourself? Harland thought of corridors, of vaults where missing miles hung like instruments, of a recorder that spoke with patience, of a room that learned his name until it could say it like family. He thought of Taylor's 2 clicks. He thought of boys lifting off into mornings that did not yet deserve their courage. I claim, he said, that I have been addressed. And that you answer? I claim, Harland said, and let the quiet do the punctuation, that I answer. The suits left. The door closed with a click that was almost kind. Only the colonel remained. He steepled his fingers, then let them fall. You will be watched, he said, by men who know how to watch. I expect to be, Harland said. Sir, with respect, watch the sky, too. The colonel's mouth twitched. It might have been a smile. Dismissed, Mr. James. Harland stood. He did not salute. He did not think the room would know what to do with it. He took the envelope, not as a judgment, but as a piece of paper that would be useful later for telling the truth. At the door, he paused and turned back. Sir, yes. If a folder lands on your desk one day that doesn't belong to any department you recognize, Harland said, open it. The colonel's eyes were very tired in the right way. I already did. Harland left the sterile office and stepped into the hallway where the lights flickered once. Not failure, but correspondence, and steadied. He could smell coffee. Far down the corridor, through ordinary glass, he could see the runway like a sentence that had agreed to be read aloud. He opened his palms. The lattice woke up, gentle, obedient. He closed them again around the heat of the stopwatch. The recorder in his pocket murmured for the first time since the door clicked shut. You are sufficient. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The office behind him had already filed a verdict under medical, and the air ahead had filed it under something else entirely. He went to the window. He went to the radio. He went to work. The airfield lay under a sky so flat it seemed painted on. Even the mountains in the north looked tired of holding up their edges. Harland stood behind a hangar glass with his envelope marked medical review in one pocket and the stopwatch burning in the other, and for the first time he understood the joke. They had grounded him to keep him safe, but the ground itself had already become runway. The night before he had dreamed, not a soldier's dream of fire and loss, but a geometric rehearsal. The corridor unrolled like staff paper, and each rib of light was a note waiting for his hand to wave. He had raised his palm, not in salute but in time, and the missing miles had fallen back into place like violins correcting after cough in the pit. He had woken with the echo of applause in his ears, though the house was empty. Now, watching the jets taxi toward dawn, he knew the dream had been less practice than appointment. He went to the office they had given him. Window, radio, a desk too clean. The recorder sat where he had left it, reels waiting. He pressed the switch. No click this time. Only a glow, faint, running along the spools as if tape were not ferric but luminous. The voice came, softer than it had ever dared. Alignment pending. Correspondence open. He touched the stopwatch. The hand leapt forward, but instead of freezing, it continued, smooth, like time had agreed to pace him instead of trap him. His chest ached with relief. For months he had been fighting stuttered seconds. Now the beat ran steady. The corridor opened without warning. Not in dream. Not in vault. Here, inside the office itself. The wall dissolved into geometry. The desk stretched into a rib of lattice. His own body shimmered, outline uncertain. He had a choice, recoil or conduct. He stood, raised his right hand. The lattice flowed into position around him, cockpit reassembling. Not the Avenger, not any aircraft that had ever earned a serial number, but a vessel built from the memory of all of them, controls lit with symbols instead of letters. Gauges spun to positions that marked not altitude or fuel, but something deeper: resonance, integrity, correspondence. The stopwatch floated to panel. It docked like a key in a lock. The corridor sang. It was not music. It was alignment, and alignment always sounds like recognition. The ribs of light bent, angles sharpening until they matched the geometry etched into his palms. His hands no longer glowed faint. They burned. His veins were conduits, his bones antennae, his breath the metronome. He did not sit in the seat. He became it. Harness fused with chest, yoke fused with hand, canopy fused with vision. Where he looked, the corridor extended. When he breathed, the lattice widened. When his heart struck its rhythm, miles stored and missing shifted obediently. The recorder's voice, conductor acknowledged, subject aligned. Harland's laugh cracked the cabin. It was not madness. It was relief. A man hearing his own name spoken correctly after a lifetime of mispronunciations. The first movement began. A squadron of F-15s lifted from the real runway outside the hangar. But in the corridor, their echoes rose too, geometric silhouettes, parallel but not identical. Harland raised his glowing palm. The silhouette staggered, then fell into time with the living jets. Every correction precise. He watched one tail twitch, real turbulence on real air. He steadied his wrist, and the echo corrected, feeding resonance back into the pilot, who never knew why his wing leveled with such grace. He had not stolen control. He had offered correspondence. The stopwatch clicked once, pleased. The second movement. Beyond the corridor, the frozen miles stirred. He could see them, lost seconds from near misses, banked into vault like currency. He reached, not with greed but with authority granted only by surrender, and pulled a handful forward. At the same time, an F-15's engine caught flame. A rookie pilot cursed into the radio. Harland pressed the seconds into the echo of that jet, gifting him a pocket of calm. In the real sky, the flame sputtered, steadied, held. The rookie never knew he had spent a treasure saved decades ago. The third movement. His reflection appeared again, not mirror, not twin, but co-conductor. Together they lifted their arms. The corridor blossomed into arcs, dozens of parallel avenues. He could see not just the present jets, but their futures. Flights not yet flown, hours not yet logged, funerals not yet avoided. He swallowed. I can't keep all of them. You can keep enough, said the recorder, and for once the voice was not only calm but proud. He chose the nearest arc, steady and patient. He guided the echoes along it, aligning their angles. Each correction bled into reality, invisible but certain. Better fuel economy, a wiser bank, a later accident canceled before it could schedule itself. Outside the corridor, the office had vanished. There was no colonel, no suits, no medical review envelope, only light and resonance. Yet he felt no absence. The world had not been taken from him. It had been translated. The stopwatch glowed like a miniature sun. Its second hand circled once, without freezing, without stutter. Time had stopped arguing. Then came the coda. The lattice tightened, not crushing but containing, like a symphony drawing its final bars. His body glowed from within, outline transparent. He could see the rhythm of his pulse not in red, but in blue-white geometry. Steady as orbit, the recorder whispered, softer than breath. Aligned. Harland raised both hands, conducted to the end. The corridor obeyed. Outside, the squadron landed without incident. Rookie nerves steadied. Logs filled with routine numbers. Pilots went home to warm dinners, never knowing their safety had been conducted from a room that no longer existed. Inside, Harland dissolved, not erased, not gone. He became the lattice, the ledger, the corridor. He became the missing miles and the seconds restored. His laugh echoed once, woven into geometry forever. They found him at the motel because that is where stories pretend to end. A room with a bedspread the color of old bandages, an air conditioner that argued with itself, a desk that had been varnished enough times to keep it from telling the truth, a window that faced a parking lot, and a vacancy sign whose red letters pulsed with the tired optimism of cheap neon. The door's brass number was loose and made a small, decent rattle when the corridor's draft walked by. Harland had chosen it because it was plain. Plainness had become his last offense. He could feel the corridor wherever he stood now, the faint pressure correspondence behind drywall and weather, the way a room's corners wanted to find ratios. Ordinary objects were his resistance. A chipped mug, a bent hanger, the habit of folding a shirt with hands that remembered checklists. He had put the stopwatch in the desk drawer and closed it as if that could deny jurisdiction. It glowed through the wood anyway. The logbook lay open, not by drama but by gravity. He had set it down and had chosen to remain ajar, spine toward him, page displaying the shy curve of the thing about to speak. He was writing with a pencil he'd sanded flat on one side, the way he always did, so it would not roll off whatever surface he trusted. Lines were straight, because they had to be. His letters had grown calmer since the vault. Block print that neither hurried nor apologized. Entry 25. Motel room. Exterior ordinary. Interior attentive. Hands still marked, heat intermittent. Radio off. Recorder present but asleep unless addressed. Status. Grounded. Observe. A line when asked. Not always asked. He stopped, eraser hovering. The word align felt like a confession and a rebuke. He drew a line through it with care and wrote beneath, listening. He let the correction sit. The page's faint frost glow accepted the change without sarcasm. Outside, tires seethed on wet pavement. Rain somewhere beyond the motel's perimeter. That cheap perfume of petrichor and dust the room would never earn. A truck's downshift explained itself and passed. Doors in other rooms had their small fights with swollen jams. Somewhere upstairs, a television rehearsed laughter for a joke no one would repeat tomorrow. He breathed. The room answered by existing, which was all he required. The knock, when it came, was polite. 2 raps. The pause had asked a favor of authority. 1 more. He did not look up. "Mr. James?" A voice said through the door, neutral, patient. Gray suit voice. "We'll need those tapes now." He kept his pencil on the page because it steadied both of them. "I'll bring the ones you can carry." A second voice, less patient by training. "Open the door, sir." He did not move. The stopwatch warmed the drawer. He could feel its heat on his thigh through the desk, like a fever trying to persuade its host. He wrote instead, choosing simplicity so as not to humiliate anyone. Agents at door. Courtesy in tone. Pressure increasing in the corners of the room. Geometry waking politely. The logbook brightened as if approving the phrase polite. On the page beneath, without his hand, a line surfaced in that winter-luminous script he had stopped pretending to doubt. Say it when asked. Say it when not asked. He read it out loud, because the room had earned the sacrament of hearing itself. You are not alone. Silence beyond the door. Men look at one another in that silence, weighing risk against policy. The lock turned, careful. The latch gave with the sound of a man deciding not to argue. The door opened 2 inches, then all the way because the chain, Harland's old habit, had not been set. 2 men entered. One with hair like pencil shavings, one with eyes that had remembered sleep. Not cruel, just assigned. The first kept both hands visible. The second did not reach for a weapon because men like this do not mistake hospitality for danger when the carpet is this color. Evening. The pencil shavings, one said. The other took inventory. Bed, desk, window, man, hands, as if he were writing a report in his head that would never be read by anyone who had ever flown. Harland raised his palms, not in surrender, but in etiquette. The lattice mark stirred, glowed a degree past obvious, then softened as if not to startle. This is a small room, he said. If you plan to make it smaller, tell me first. The men did not smile. Agency has no time for a grin that might land on paper. We're here for the tapes and the logbook, the sleepy-eyed one said, voice not unkind. and to ask you to come with us. Further review. Medical or operational? Harland said, and watched the fractions of their faces that knew what that meant. Both, the first man said. Truth, the least expensive option. The stopwatch pushed heat through the drawer, a pulse against the edge of his thigh. He considered reaching for it, and didn't. He had asked for plainness. He would not contradict himself. You'll get tapes, he said. You'll get what the logbook will let you keep, and you'll get a version of me that fits through your door. You'll come now, the second said. He did not make an order. He made it a sentence that had already happened. Harland nodded. Let me put on my jacket. He stood. The room leaned quietly toward him, corners recalculating like polite servants anticipating the turn of a chair. He slid his arms into the jacket that had learned the shape of him after a long season of weather. He felt absurd tenderness of the seam that had frayed at his right cuff and held anyway. He closed the desk drawer without touching the stopwatch. The wood warmed his fingers through varnish. The men stepped aside a fraction to let him pass. He did not pass. He stepped toward the logbook instead. It brightened like the surface of a pond when sun pries apart clouds. Letters surfaced without ink, the room writing to itself. You are not alone. He had seen the sentence in the corridor, in the hangar glass, on the knee board. He had said it when asked and when not asked. He put a fingertip to the glow. It did not flatten under his touch. It absorbed him a degree, like mercy. Mr. James, the first man said, gentle as a teacher who knows a bell is about to ring. We really do need to go. I know, Harland said. Something curious, then. The motel's thin curtains breathed inward, though the air conditioner had not changed its argument. The neon through the windows smeared, then resolved, then smeared again across the glass. The room's right angle by the ceiling rounded infinitesimally, the way corners do in houses that have learned to hold music. The bedspread's pattern of vines, so dishonest in daylight, shifted until the leaves found ratios. A glass of tap water on the nightstand stilled and brightened. The stopwatch warmed quickly in the drawer. He could see its light through the wood now, pale and insistent. He placed his left hand flat on the desk, as if to calm an animal before opening its pen. The lattice in his skin answered in the affirmative. The men's eyes changed. Not widened. Trained eyes don't. But what they had been looking at became, briefly, something they were learning to look into. Sir, said the sleepy-eyed man, not unbrave, what are you about to do? Spend correctly, Harland said. He opened the drawer. The stopwatch lay there like a small star surprised by its own domesticity. Its second hand did not tremble. It kept a patient circle, as if having argued with time and negotiated peace. He placed it on the desk, not to flee with it, not to hide it, but to give it horizon. He set his right palm beside it. Glow polite, a visiting officer easing a chair back under a mess table. He did not press the crown. He did not need to. The room had stopped requiring demonstration. It had become instrument. The first man's hand hovered near his jacket. He did not draw. The second said, in a voice he might later call professional if asked to testify, don't. Harland looked up at them and did the only decent thing left. He told the truth aloud so that his leaving would not become unnecessary mystery. I have been addressed, he said. I am answering. The room obliged. Light did not burst so much as arrive. It came through the logbook seam first, as if the spine had been a door on a hinge you could not see. It bled into the ruled lines, into the pencil strokes, into the margins where his small arrogance had once made notes to himself. The words on the page did not burn away. They held, translucent, readable within the radiance like the good minutes in a hard day. The lamp went blind, then obedient, then irrelevant. The neon outside blinked twice and decided to be starlight for a breath, then resumed its hired labor. The motel's bedspread learned humility. The carpet unlearned its stains. The men stepped back, not from fear, exactly, but from the long habit of making room for whatever is about to be bigger than your training. The first man found his voice first. What is this? He asked, and did not apologize for asking the right question too late. Alignment, Harland said, but gentle. The logbook turned a page without his hand. The next leaf filled with frost script in a language of clean edges. Agreement sustains you. Discipline aligns you. Memory qualifies you. Mercy conducts you. He choked on the last line, old habit refusing to let kindness into the record. He put his palm on the sentence. It did not change. It did not need to. The stopwatch lifted from the desk without leaving dents in the varnish. It rose to the level of his sternum and docked him, not as wound, not as chain, but as a precise ornament a uniform occasionally deserves. Heat seeped into his bones. The glow spread, not outward like fire, but inward like acceptance. "Sir," the second man said, less officer now, more son, "we can take you somewhere safer." Harland looked at him and loved him in the modest way one man is permitted to love another in a small room between duties. "You can take me somewhere else," he said, "but not safer." The first man lifted a hand, not to grab, but to bless, and hated himself for it. The gesture was too human for his training. He allowed it anyway and called it contact in the report that would make him choose a noun. The light gathered. The lattice aligned. The window dissolved into ribs that did not exclude the world beyond but admitted it in the correct geometry. Parking lot, neon rain, long interstates braided into the dark like staff lines on sheet music. The desk became a bridge and then a throat and then a very old door. The bed became an honest hill under summer. The ceiling discovered a sky it had never earned. The closet opened into nowhere in particular and was content. Harland stood. The stopwatch's circle made a halo where sensible men needed the absence of halos. He did not glow saintly. He glowed like a diagram. When he breathed, the ribs in the room breathed, too. "Harland," said a voice that had not spoken in many pages. Taylor's, shamelessly imperfect, full of coffee and salt and responsibility. Not in his ear, not in his head. In the room, like a radio you forgot you left on. 2 clicks followed, quiet as gratitude. "I'm on your wing," Harland said, and knew he was lying and telling the truth at once. The men reached the point all watchers reach. The moment when you choose between drawing a weapon you will never fire and drawing a breath you will never regret. They drew the breath. It made them taller for a second. The light made its last decision. It did not swallow him. It learned him until he could be carried without pain. Outline thinned. Hands brightened. The ladder of bones in his wrists accepted the algebra they had always refused to see. His mouth held a line of humor and apology and resolve. His eyes, still human, God bless the stubbornness, refused to blink at the wrong time. He turned a fraction so that the men would see his profile and be spared the indecency of seeing a man's face become instruction. He placed his palm flat on the open page and left a print there, a clean geometry that would feed rumors and refusals for years. He took his hand away. The mark remained, not as scorch, not as stain, but as frost, something you breathe on and briefly make your own. "Tell them," he said, and let the room choose the rest of the sentence. It did. The logbook wrote for him. He was addressed. He answered. He stepped forward, because forward is what men like him were taught. The light admitted him the way a choir admits a new voice if it can hold pitch. His shoulder crossed first, then his chest, then the stubborn jaw, then the part of him that had been a boy on a farm lifting a balsa glider into air that had not yet introduced itself. The stopwatch's hand made one clean, satisfied circuit. The door of the corridor opened all at once, and not at all. The agents flinched without moving. The lamp hummed. The neon apologized to no one. The rain became the rain you remember from a night when someone you loved came home. Harland was half in and half still permitted to hear his name. The second man, bless him for it, said it. "Harland," he said, and there was no sir left in him. "Yes," Harland answered, because that had always been the correct response. "Are you?" The man couldn't finish coming back. He wasn't authorized to say going where. Harland's smile was small and correct. "Sufficient," he said, and did not burden them with a larger theology. He stepped the rest of the way. The geometry closed like a book that has finished teaching. The room's corners remembered being corners. The lamp resumed service. The curtain forgot the ocean. The bedspread reassumed its patter of vines with an embarrassed cough. The air conditioner lost the argument gracefully. The 2 men stood in a room that had decided to be plain again, their hands empty of everything except duty. On the desk, the logbook lay open. The frost letters did not fade. The print of a right hand remained. A map a boy could trace with his finger, a museum no one would fund. The stopwatch was gone, or rather, it had taken its correct place and was no longer an object. Outside, cars passed, brakes squeaked. Someone laughed with their mouth full, and a semi's horn rode a long vow the sky accepted with decent patience. The first man shut the drawer, because it should be shut. The second reached toward the logbook and did not touch. He read the line out loud, because a thing spoken into a room lasts longer than a thing left to paper. He was addressed. He answered. His partner cleared his throat and found what report writers call conclusion. "Take the book," he said, then, indulgent with himself, added, "and leave it." They left the room as you leave a chapel you didn't expect to find in a strip mall. The door's latch made its decent click. The brass number rattled once. Then learn not to. Night moved across the parking lot, unarmed. The neon buzzed. In a room on the second floor, someone changed a channel, and learned nothing. The motel settled into its proper fiction. On the desk, the logbook adjusted its own weight on the varnish. A new line drew itself, deliberate, generous, in letters anyone could read. You are not alone. Far away, in a building with glass that remembered pair of hands, a radar sweep turned, chose not to record one blip that would have been a comfort and a complication. In a kitchen, a woman set down a plate, paused, left a chair empty without ceremony, and reached for the salt because fear is fed or it is fed upon. In a field behind a fence, a boy looked up because the fence made the sky honest. There was no trumpet. There was no blue fire. There was only a ledger learning where to store man, so that he could be spent correctly. If you had stood in a motel room an hour later with the lights off and the curtains open to the vacancy sign, if you had let your eyes learn the dark the way sailors do, you might have seen, on the logbook's open page, on the varnished desk, in the air between very faint geometry, accurate as frost, patient as bookkeeping. You might have said his name without meaning to, and the room would have had the good manners not to echo it back. In another register, where corridors are roads and vaults are conservatories, and missing miles are instruments waiting their players, a new hand lifted, not alone, and kept time.